Alrighty, looks like we might be live and alive. Give me a few moments to check a few settings, and we're going to get started on Thursdays, which I think we're going to try to make into the teaching, educational-ish kind of thing. It's somewhat similar to the other content whenever I'm critically analyzing and reviewing something, but we're going to kind of do this on some more classic stuff, and I might do readings from like classic literature, like we did a little bit of the Ursula K. Le Guin thing. Might do this, and this is going to be kind of still part of the same series, the same kind of project of examining elements of anti-intellectualism and kind of the faults of intellectual discourse that can happen for various reasons, and just kind of some degree of entertainment and poking fun at some of the figures that I've come across over the many years of looking into this thing. So we're going to be looking at today. I think we got the setup's fine enough. It's not great, but it will works well enough. Let's get that guy over here. It should all look still okay. Kinda, not really. Why is it tiny? Just there. And looking okay on your end? It looks all right on your end. All right, so we're going to do just kind of a notes thing. This is just Notepad. Again, I actually was going to start using Obsidian for taking notes, but haven't quite got it set up the way I want, so we'll just do it the old school way. So, as you can see, one of the things, and you can probably see this from the title, what we're going to be looking at today, kind of a deeper dive for as long as we can, is going to be Sam Harris's and Noam Chomsky's kind of debate, non-debate, because it wasn't really much of a debate because it never actually got off the ground into being any kind of debate. We should probably have some basic music in the background. I feel like it's a little stale if we don't have any music in the background. One second here. Let's see. Can we find let's see. We're just gonna try to find a nice basic looking um kind of background music if we can. Keep it nice and low, just so it isn't quite so boring. Hate that site. Oof. Yeah, no, we're not gonna. Okay, so all of those look terrible, and they were gonna sound terrible to my ear. So we'll just have to do it live. All right. So let's go with nice big, and we're gonna have to do this a few times. All right. So we all kind of know who Sam Harris is, or we should have a general idea. He's kind of one of those semi-intellectual dark web figures. He's kind of a slightly earlier version, even though he's younger. He's kind of that same area as, say, the like the Jordan Petersons, the Brett Weinsteins. Someone who was kind of in academia or around it. They got their degree. They got their advanced degree and all that kind of stuff. They bummed around academia for a bit, and then they kind of left or were so-called driven out for their views. Um, Sam Harris is not quite that degree of uh, appeal to that kind of pathetic standard, but it is more. He was more the atheist kind of aspect, if I for the most part. Again, he tends to again be a political commentator, so he talks about a lot of things. He's also kind of a self-stylized uh, philosopher. His original start was kind of a big. He was big into new atheism. If you guys remember the new atheist movement of kind of the 2000s or whatnot, the early 2000s, 90s, 2000s, and along with kind of like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and who was the other horseman of like were semi self stylized, or people stylized them as like the horsemen of the apocalypse for uh, religion. Um, his big thing was again just mostly anti arguing atheistic and anti religion stuff, whatever. Though he goes into philosophy a fair bit. Um, I believe he's got a PhD in neuroscience, something like that, cognitive neuroscience, something along those lines. Um, uh, but his primary kind of interest always has been some degree of religion. I think he did get a degree. Maybe it was the bachelor's in philosophy. Um, something like that. I want to say. Um, but that's kind of his shtick, is that he's been that kind of way, and he's written on a lot of different things. You know, free will, artificial intelligence. He's a somewhat political, intellectual commentator. So he commentates on what's the popular thing of the day. Um, pro or anti stuff like that. And again, yeah, it basically just kind of a self-stylized intellectual dark web, part of this web that is in the dark, and it's dark horse, and it's outside academia and shit like that. Now, Noam Chomsky, well, he's probably the most famous and influential philosopher in America today, and or certainly one of the most cited and one of the most kind of recognized ones at throughout all of America. He kind of came up during the 60s and 70s, major kind of criticism of not American left, American foreign policy, big influence on American leftism. Came up with the manufactured consent kind of idea with the hell was his Skinner, something like that, something Skinner is his last name. No, that's not Skinner. He was talking with Skinner about that. Who the fuck did he do this with? What was it? Shit. Herman. That's got it. That's, yeah, God, I was mixing up my people here. Yeah. Um, about manufacturing consent. Basically, he's kind of been a Sam Harris figure, but his accolades and his breadth of work, and for the most part, his philosophy work and his intellectual work is considerably better. Just simply put, it's just better. It's way higher level. He holds himself to an incredibly high standard, usually with this stuff, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with his opinion. Usually, he's a pretty solid intellectual and academic. Even if you might disagree with some of his conclusions, or some of his prescriptions, some of his descriptions, his citations, his body of work is pretty hard to impeach. He's pretty damn solid throughout. even if you don't like his politics, he's a damn good academic. One of his biggest kind of intellectual things that he affected was again the linguistic field and kind of the philosophy of language field. Though again, his other big thing is that he's written many, many books upon, again, U.S. foreign policy, very critical of that. So we have kind of two intellectuals, like an old school, very, very much academic kind of intellectual, raised in academia and part of, again, the radical kind of left movement of academia versus kind of the more pop culture, new age, intellectual dark web. So if we read here, we can have this kind of description, and I don't know if you would give this, I suppose in many ways you could say this is a positive of Sam Harris, but in other ways you could actually see it as just reinforcing another major problem with Sam Harris, is he had this email exchange with Noam Chomsky. He wanted to kind of discuss, like maybe set up a debate, because he disagreed with some of the things Chomsky said, and Chomsky had made a couple of notes about Sam Harris that Sam Harris didn't like at all. So he was thinking, how maybe we can hash out this, disagreement and, some kind of debate format, blah, blah, blah. Or at the very least, do this email exchange. It goes incredibly poorly for the most part, though I think it still is constructive, just not really in the way that Sam Harris wanted. And Sam Harris decides he's going to publish it because, well, we'll get to the end of why he wants to publish it, but we start off with this. So this is from Sam Harris's site. So understand that anything that's not in the emails is Sam Harris writing, and kind of trying to explain himself. So we have to understand we're getting this from one side when we see these things. So, but let's look at his summary here. Sam Harris and Noam Chomsky attempt to have a conversation about the ethics of war, terrorism, state surveillance, and related topics, and fail. So he judged this as a failure. They failed to have a conversation about this. I would suggest that this is Sam Harris, again, not really understanding what happened. So Harris v. Chomsky. So one of the biggest problems with the Harris and Chomsky debate was there a failure to communicate? That's the question we have right here. It even starts at the end. Was there a failure to have a conversation? In many ways, yes. In many ways, no. Yes/no. The conversation happened, but Harris, and I might be, poisoning the well a little bit, but Harris failed to understand and engage with the conversation, and it starts off on a bad foot because of Harris's failure. This is something I do believe that has to be accounted for. Harris does kind of undersell how he starts this conversation. How this conversation actually starts versus what you might think. So, we continue. For decades, Noam Chomsky has been one of the most prominent critics of U.S. foreign policy, and the further left one travels along the political spectrum, the more one feels his influence. Although I agree with much of what Chomsky has said about the misuse of state power, I have long maintained that his political views, where the threat of global jihadism is concerned, produce dangerous delusions. So this is where we get into another one of the big issues here, is that Harris is obsessed with Islam and the threat of terrorism. To such an extent that nothing really penetrates past this ideological construct. There's just nothing that really gets through this. He is so anti-Islam and anti the threat of jihadism. He is so obsessed and he's so terrified and so angry at it that anything that even comes within a micro fucking meter, comes within a billion miles, as close or as far away from even beginning to think about things outside of that perspective, when it comes to this topic, he has almost no ability to rationally think about it anymore. In response, I have been much criticized by those who believe I haven't given the great man his due. Last week, I did my best to engineer a public conversation with Chomsky about the ethics of war, terrorism, state surveillance, and related topics. As readers of the following email exchange will discover, I failed. I've decided to publish this private correspondence with Chomsky's permission as a cautionary tale. Clearly, he and I have drawn different lessons from what was, unfortunately, an unpleasant and fruitless encounter. I will let readers draw their own lessons. I do also just somehow, like, this might be kind of mean, but Harris really does like the smell of his own farts. Harris's ego it blinds him to his failings. This ego and arrogance blind him to his failings. And even when he knows he failed, he thinks it's because of outside / uncontrollable factors, and the air. Boy, that was terrible. Yeah, I was almost there. Just irreconcilable differences between logic and emotion. And he's always going to present himself as logic. He is always going to present himself as being just the purely logical one, and everyone else is just kind of, this is just, sometimes you want to have a conversation with a person, but they just can't be. They just aren't there yet. So, this happens in 2015, 10 years ago. We hit the anniversary sometime earlier this year. So, from Sam Harris to Noam Chomsky, the very first email. Noam, I reached out to you indirectly through Lawrence Krauss and Johann Hari, and was planning to leave it at that, but a reader has now sent me a copy of an email exchange in which you were quite dismissive of the prospect of having a debate with me. So I just want to clarify that, although I think we might disagree substantially about a few things, I am far more interested in exploring these disagreements and clarifying any misunderstandings than in having a conventional debate. Okay, so there has been contact made. Through mutual friends or mutual academics and whatnot, that Sam Harris wanted to have a debate. Now, for Sam Harris, is it a debate? Well, this is where Sam Harris is going to get kind of slimy, to where Sam Harris wants it both ways. Sam Harris almost certainly said he would be up for a debate with Chomsky and to discuss and debate these things. There isn't really much of a significant difference between the two, though, again, if you're looking very strictly at it, you could, and it might be useful to do this. But again, this exploring these disagreements, clarifying misunderstandings, I again, I'm not the again, Chomsky's not fooled by this passive presentation. Again, Chomsky's been in academia for a long time. He knows this. You get two intellectual people in who disagree in a scenario where they're going to be discussing and arguing back and forth and trying to argue definitions and argue one way or the other way. It's basically an intellectual debate. It's like this conversation. Like, if you want it public, it's a debate. If you want a conversation, you send me an email, or you chat me up on the at lunch in the lunch hall. It might be kind of old school think of that, but again, this is the difference between public and personal and private. And this idea that it's not a debate, this immediately me, especially with the way we're kind of writing here. I'm far more interested in exploring this, blah, blah, blah. For me, I'm going to cut this down to is that you think I was either scared or otherwise dismissive of the idea of having a debate. You're still trying to get me to debate you. This is all fluff. This is just weird. Why are you trying to fucking butter my biscuit here? Just fucking make your point and get on with it. Don't waste my time. If you'd rather not have a public conversation with me, that's fine. I can only say that we have many, many readers in common who would like to see us attempt to find some common ground. Again, an appeal to popularity. And some kind of almost profit orientation. Hey, we have tons of people. I'm popular, you're popular, and they would probably find it greatly, instructive and also fun and interesting. Like, this is all kind of well and good, and you might see, oh yeah, I could kind of understand this. But the big thing is to also remember is that Chomsky is very, very critical of capitalism. And that tends to mean that he is also sometimes quite critical of behaviors and or ideology that is very capitalistic. That's very profit orientated. That's very much, hey, we do this like this. Might as well be like two YouTubers who are going to have a debate. And they don't really care who wins or loses because they just know that no matter what, it's going to be popular. And even if they like hate each other, even if they talk shit about each other and they curse each other out there, the debate's just super hostile. Like, next week they'll have another one. Why? Because, oh, that was great. That was a great kind of fight. Like, this isn't a fight to win. This is a fight for the fight's sake because the fight is an entertainment. So there's this kind of lack of seriousness that, again, I don't necessarily 100% have this point of view, but I would, especially knowing Chomsky's background, because I would study Chomsky before, and I've not quite studied him extensively, but I know some bits and bobs about Chomsky. I would immediately know that, look, this guy is he takes himself very seriously. He takes his work very seriously. He takes public performances. He takes intellectual debate. He takes all of those things, whether you especially written, and this is going to be really important, is that he takes it incredibly important, is that this is not a game for him. This isn't fun for him necessarily. This isn't some kind of game. This isn't some let's have some fucking tea. He takes this very, very seriously. There's also a degree of undermining the problem. Chomsky takes issues with this because what Sam Harris in this initial email is kind of missing is that he's failing to explain the background of what happened between Harris and Chomsky before this email exchange. Now you see, oh, well, he somewhat indirectly reached out through Krauss and Hari to maybe have a debate, and he seemed dismissive. And we can see a little bits of this here. The fact that you have called me a religious fanatic who worships the religion of state makes me think there are a few misconceptions I could clear up, and many readers insist that I am similarly off the mark where your views are concerned. Okay, so this eventually the background will be revealed, but there's a couple of things. One, he's making a call and writing to Chomsky that Chomsky has referred to him as a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. Quote. Now, that's important, but we'll move on for a second here. And that other readers of this have insisted that he is off the mark where Chomsky's views is concerned. So that Sam Harris says Chomsky has said some bad things about him that he's not in liking, and he's quoting him. And then he's also saying, I'm somewhat off the mark with your ideas, apparently according to these things. So for Chomsky, this is the thing. In the eyes of an old school kind of academic, and honestly lots of academics, misrepresentation and misquoting is the deadliest of sins. It is absolutely something that will piss them off beyond all reason and measure, because this is their entire world, their entire life is writing. It is the words on the page. It is the meaning of these words. They spend many hours, days, years sometimes working on the words that they're putting on the page, the communication. If you are deliberately or through just blind ignorance or really bad reading skills misrepresenting or misquoting them and then trying to pass that off as this is what this person believes, that will piss them off. Boy, will that piss them off. That will get you all kinds of in trouble here. Now, we have two instances here. It seems like Harris may have misquoted or maybe been off the mark about Chomsky's views, and Chomsky, maybe he said some quotes that Harris is saying, like religious fanatic, worships the religion of state, as incorrect. So, one, we would need to see, are these equal? And are they... Oh my God. Are they fairly presented? I would argue that they will not be. And Chomsky is going to argue that this is a problem. That right off the bat, we're starting off with a problem where Sam's just trying to ice over some issues, and Chomsky is going to take issue with the fact that he's trying to ice over this problem without admitting that there's a problem. So, we're going to take a short little break. I need to go get some water. I will be back in just a second. Okay, we're back. So, here we are. We're at a Sam Harris's being relatively polite here, though again, there's a couple of things here. Is that why? And I'm going to take somewhat the side of Chomsky here because I believe ultimately Chomsky has the better claim, and we'll explain why. But there is a couple of things here that even in this email, even before this, there is somewhat of a, again, as we see with this kind of undermining the problem that issue is taking that Chomsky takes issue with, is that there is a bit of just kind of lack of accountability for the previous issues or issues that Harris should, if he's doing his research, if he's thinking about this and he's thought about this to any degree or any degree of seriousness that Chomsky would hold, that Harris should know that the reason why Chomsky doesn't want to debate him and thinks it would be useless, if Harris hasn't done the kind of background to kind of understand that, then any future conversations about this are going to be relatively unproductive. And we're going to see one now. But, so Chomsky replies, same day, to Harris. Perhaps I have some misconceptions of you. What I have read of yours is material that has been sent to me about my alleged views, which is completely false. I don't see any point in public debate about misreadings. If there are things you'd like to explore privately, fine, but with sources. So, short, to the point, no buttering language, nothing like that. You might think it's a pretty bold, but alright, so he says, perhaps misconceptions, but what is there is bad and essentially non-productive because false claims, because no sense debate false claims. All right. There is no reason to have public debate. And again, from a logical standpoint, again, there is no real reason to debate these false claims, misreadings. He's very much a factual orientated kind of thing. Like arguing Sam's opinion on his work is utterly nonsensical and stupid. He's not going to argue Sam's opinion. He's not going to have a debate with Sam about whether or not Sam believes and likes what he does or doesn't do. That's irrelevant to serious academic work. And in Chomsky eyes, and also kind of a lot of academia, it's, again, we play around with it and we, for attention and whatnot, but ultimately it is not particularly productive. There is no debate to be had. So from here we have a couple of things that Chomsky is pointing out. So a couple of things we might note here. So he admits maybe there's some misconceptions, but we can see kind of the alleged here. So I have read material. So Harris has written about Chomsky. Chomsky has not written about Harris. Has written about Chomsky. The next thing definitely is that from Chomsky's opinion is that he has written false things. No point in discussing in public. Again, private maybe, but in public, no, because there's no real point. Public opinion, the public show, that public scene that is for serious academic debate. We're not going to waste our time just debating who likes who and who doesn't like who. That's a useless waste of my time. All right. But nice, short, to the point. If you want to discuss things privately, sure, but I don't know much about you. This is basically what I'm saying. I don't know much about you. What I do know is I've got it from reading materials that have been sent to me regarding my views. And I believe these are false. I don't see any reason to debate misreadings on your part. You want to explore this? Public? Fine. All right. Third email. And we're going to abandon some of these number things in the thing here. All right. Third email. Thanks for getting back. Before engaging on this topic, I'd like to encourage you to approach this exchange as though we were planning to publish it. As edifying as it might be to have you correct my misreadings of you in private, it would be far better if you did this publicly. It's not a matter of having a debate about misreadings. It's a matter of allowing our readers to see the conversation on difficult and polarizing topics can occasionally fulfill its ostensible purpose. Remember again when I said that Harris likes to smell his own farts? This is kind of like, this is really, it's weirdly patronizing. And again, for him to be patronizing, of all people, Noam Chomsky on the ideas and the merits of academic style approaching. Like we're planning to publish this. And again, there's irony here because Chomsky's going to point out that that Harris does not practice what he preaches when it comes to treating things seriously for publication. If I have misread you and you can show me where I've gone wrong, I would want my readers to see my views change in real time. It would be far less desirable for me to simply report that you and I clarified a few things privately and that I've now changed my mind about X, Y, and Z. Again, this just feels like, if you break this down, it's just kind of in the online YouTube sphere, this just feels like begging for content. This doesn't feel like, well, as edified as it might be to correct this, and I want you to do this, and again, this is just another kind of like, I want you to debate me so that I can have something to publish and talk about all this stuff, and it can't just be private. I want it, just I want content, and it really comes off as it just comes off to, for me, bad. There's some merit here, but again, the degree of masturbation over the intellectual discourse feels a bit put on. Like, it is serious and it is important, but this one feels a little bit, it just feels over the top. Beyond correcting our misreadings, I think we could have a very interesting conversation about the ethical issues surrounding war, terrorism, and surveillance state, and so forth. I'd be happy to do this entirely by email, or we could speak on the phone and have the audio transcript. In either case, you would feel free to edit and refine your contributions prior to publication. My only request is that would be that you not go back and make such sweeping changes that I would have to totally revise my side of things. Again, begging for content. Again, this is an intellectual pursuit. Write your own shit, do your own thing. Like, you want me to talk to you, but you want to, okay, sure. It just feels this weird, you're taking human communication and you're both making it, taking it seriously, but then there's this, it feels like a kid who like puts on a suit and tie and starts trying to take himself super seriously, like everything is super seriously, like some 16-year-old kid, to where it's like, yeah, it's serious, but at the same time you are playing at being mature rather than being mature, and understanding that maturity doesn't mean this weird obsession with the presentation of maturity. That maturity is something that just comes through being mature, through enacting and doing things in a mature manner, not necessarily caring about the visual of it. While you're thinking about that, I'd like to draw your attention to the only thing I've ever written about your work. The following passages appear in my first book, The End of Faith, 2004, which was written in response to the events of 9/11. Needless to say, the whole discussion portrays the urgency of that period, as well as many of the failings of a first book. I hesitate to put it forward here, if for no other reason than the tone is not one that I would ever adopt in a direct exchange with you. Nevertheless, if I've misrepresented your views in this writing, this is the only place that could have happened. If we're going to clarify misreadings, this would seem like a good place to start. This is fine. Again, this kind of weird begging like this. I know I wrote this and my tone was really harsh. So sorry. Sorry for the unprofessional tone of the book. I was upset and traumatized. Which is it's a poor excuse again, but not one. Again, Chomsky's been fiery at points in here, so he's not going to do this. So again, it's kind of like this. Look, I'm not going to be offended by your tone. Again, it's a poor excuse. Unimportant. Again, tone does not matter that much. It can matter certainly to some degree, but again, for the most part, Chomsky's a big boy. He's been here for a while. This whole ingratiating yourself to a superior while at the same time trying to appear equal, but also not. It feels like you're trying to suck up, but not because you actually respect the person, but because you just want them to engage with you. This feels disingenuous. Just cut the bullshit. Just say, here's where it is. The first book probably has some errors. I'm certainly willing to admit this, but this might have some issues. So, I've only written about you in End of Faith. Okay, so we finally get into it. So, Leftist Unreason in the Strange Case of Noam Chomsky. Here's where he is writing about Noam Chomsky. Nevertheless, many people are now convinced that the attacks of September 11 say little about Islam and much about the sordid career of the West. In particular, the failures of U.S. foreign policy. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard gives these themes an especially luxuriant expression, declaring that terrorism is a necessary consequence of American hegemony. He goes so far as to suggest that we are secretly hoping that such devastation would be visited upon us. At a pinch, this is Baudrillard, at a pinch we can say that they did it, but we wished for it. When global power monopolizes the situation to this extent, when there is such a formidable condensation of all functions in the technocratic machinery, and when no alternative form of thinking is allowed, what other way is there but a terroristic situational transfer? It was the system itself which created the objective conditions for this brutal retaliation. This is terror against terror. There is no longer an ideology behind it. We are far beyond ideology in politics now. As if the power bearing these towers suddenly lost energy, all resilience, as though that arrogant power suddenly gave way under the pressure of too intense an effort, the effort always to be unique world models. If one were feeling charitable, one might assume that something essential to these profundities gets lost in translation. Again, I'm very suspicious that we have in a long quote here. I am very, very suspicious of 3 ellipses, which shows that things have been cut out. Again, it's not a bad form, but it does feel excessive in this moment here. Like, if he's talking about how we were hoping for this, how our hegemony creates it, and we were hoping for it, I would want to see, there probably is more explanation about this, the hoping for, and we have the system creating here. And for the most part, what Baudrillard is saying here doesn't really sound that outside the bounds of reality, and it doesn't require much translation. It's fairly easy to understand. But he continues. I think it is far more likely, however, that it did not survive translation in French. If Baudrillard had been obliged to live in Afghanistan under the Taliban, would he have thought that the horrible abridgments of his freedom were a matter of United States efforts always to be the unique world model? Would the particular halftime entertainment at every soccer match were suspected fornications? Again, he's now going to list all the problems, all the evils of Islam that he lays at the feet of Islam and the Taliban. Suspected fornicators, adulterators, and thieves were regularly butchered in the dirt at center field, have struck him as the first rumblings of terroristic situational transfer. We may be beyond politics, but we're not in the least beyond ideology now. Ideology is all that our enemies have. Again, this kind of misses the point of what he's talking about when he's talking about the. And again, you may think that other things play a greater role in here, but this is kind of unfair to Baudrillard. Again, this idea that, well, if you lived here, you would want the Taliban destroyed. You would want America to come in here and destroy everything. It's kind of like, well, no, again, you're missing the point. You're missing the point pretty hard here. This is this weird. Um, Again, it's just kind of this weird chauvinistic. America is the savior of all things and is the best way to live. And it's like, it's a nice way. But the biggest problem is that we tend to ignore the cost that our living kind of comes at from the world stage. And again, what he's also talking about here, at least Baudrillard here, is talking about we make systems that serve us. We hegemonize it, we monopolize this power to such a degree with no alternative forms of existence that extremism and terrorism is born from this pressure cooker. That it's a relatively simple, fucking straightforward thing. Is that uh kind of like, again, if you oppress people, you're going to there is a chance you're going to get riots, you're going to get a reaction, and it's oftentimes going to be a fairly brutal and not conducive to good living reaction. Oftentimes when you create those situations, you're also going to create a situation where the only things that can survive without immediately falling to the hegemony, and even then the hegemony is not serviceable to the oppressed because they can never actually join, because their function in this system is to be the oppressed. Even if they adopt the American lifestyle or the American way of being, they'll never be in the American way of being. So the only way for people to hold on to some degree of resistance against this force of hegemony is usually extremist forms. Again, for the most part, there's nothing particularly profound in this statement because this is relatively straightforward thinking. And his response is, but what about how evil and terrible they are? And it's just like, well, that doesn't matter. I'm not talking about whether or not they're good or evil. I'm talking about cause and effect. I'm talking about simple mathematics in this sense. Again, Harris's response is incredibly just emotionally driven. He continues, and yet thinkers far more sober than. So we could maybe write some notes on this one. I don't really like writing notes in the notepad. I need to get Obsidian up and running because it would be much better. But emotional appeal to evil here. Ah, these people are evil and you have to fight evil. Again, simplistic thinking. Thinkers far more sober than Baudrillard view the events of September 11th as a consequence of American foreign policy. Perhaps the foremost among them is Noam Chomsky. In addition to making foundational contributions to linguistics and psychology of language, Chomsky has been a persistent critic of U.S. foreign policy for over 3 decades. He has also managed to demonstrate a principal failing of the liberal critique of power. He appears to be an exquisitely moral man whose political views prevent him from making the most basic moral distinctions between types of violence and the variety of human purposes and the variety of human purposes that give rise to them. In his book 9/11, with the rubble of Trade Center still piled high and smoldering, again, Sam Harris likes to say that he's not this way, and he's not this emotional, whatever, but he absolutely is still super emotionally driven, super hyperbolic. This is classic, um, emotional driven, not logical or academic driven writing. Chomsky urged us not to forget that the U.S. itself is a leading terrorist state. Singular little quote, no citation, but okay, we have a citation maybe at the end there. But again, it's a leading terrorist state. Again, doing these small little quotes in here always. Again, I was always taught that whenever you're going to quote people, especially when it comes to like a major statement of fact or an opinion, try to use larger block quotes that can give context pre the quote or around the quote that gives this person, the academic, room to explain themselves effectively, and then you, in subsequent paragraphs, can pick and choose particular phrases and parts of statements and wording and can do so you give the reader full benefit of the opposition and then you can attack it. This piecemeal kind of quotation, again, he does it with Baudrillard, but he doesn't do it with Chomsky. And that's kind of annoying. That's going to lead to problems of misrepresentation, or it can. In support of this claim, he catalogs a number of American misdeeds, including the sanctions excuse me, and sanctions that the United States imposed upon Iraq, which led to the death of maybe 500,000 children, and the 1998 bombing of the Al-Shifa Pharmaceuticals plant in Sudan, which may have set the stage for tens of thousands of innocent Sudanese to die of tuberculosis, malaria, and other treatable diseases. Chomsky does not hesitate to draw moral equivalencies here. For the first time in modern history, Europe and its offshoots were subjected on home soil to the kind of atrocity that they routinely have carried out elsewhere. This is a problem. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, this is a problem. Because the big thing is that this right here, is this a moral claim? And a moral equivalency. You might see some degree of morality in the word atrocity. But for the most part, this is a statement of fact. Especially if you ignore this one. Europe and its offshoots were subjected to the same kind of violence that they have routinely carried out elsewhere. Is this a moral claim? You might think it might imply one, but this is outside of the text. You're trying to add an interpretation here. Spoiler alert, Chomsky takes pretty hard issue with this one. Is that, or at least to a certain degree, is that he doesn't try to equivalence these things. He's not trying to compare these things in the sense of which one is better or worse and one is justified, non-justified. Nothing like that. He's simply doing, and this may seem boring to people, is that he is simply saying that these things are similar, not necessarily, or they're equivalent as far as basic action, consequence, and structure, but we're not talking about morality here. Not necessarily. Before pointing out just how wayward Chomsky's thinking is on the subject, I would like to concede many of the points since they have the virtue of being both generally important and irrelevant to the matter at hand. There is no doubt, again, I'm not sure if it's irrelevant, but again, there is no doubt that the United States has much to atone for both domestically and abroad. In this respect, we can more or less swallow Chomsky's thesis whole. To produce this horrible confection at home, start with our genocidal treatment of Native Americans, a couple hundred years of slavery, Third Reich, Cambodia, Pentagon Papers to taste. He makes some kind of random, again, bullshit. He's just saying, I agree with these atrocities, I agree with this is bad. We have surely done some terrible things in the past. Undoubtedly, we are poised to do terrible things in the future. Nothing I've written in this book should be construed as a denial of these facts, his defense of the state practices that are manifestly abhorrent. I would disagree heavily with this, and Chomsky would probably disagree to a certain degree. Primarily because Sam Harris does draw moral equivalency between the actions of the United States that it takes in foreign countries and the actions that Al Qaeda did, because he says that these are different because the people who did them are different. Some are good and some are evil. That means that the actions themselves are not good, are affected by the fact it was a good person and people who intended for good to happen here. So the action is predicated by the intention to do the action and the ideology behind it. There are good people and there are bad people. So in the end, you actually do, through this process, defend the state on its intentions and its ideology and its thing, and you don't look at the actions. You are justifying the actions, and he will do this later on. There may be much that the Western powers in the United States in particular should pay reparations for, and our failure to acknowledge our misdeeds over the years has undermined our credibility in the international community. We can concede all of this and even shares Chomsky's acute sense of outrage. Again, Chomsky is not outraged. He's not emotionally put forth on this, not in that writing. You haven't really shown that. He's simply pointing out a problem. Take the bombing of Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plants. According to Chomsky, the atrocity of September 11th pales in comparison. Again, he doesn't make a comparison necessarily in morality from a moral standpoint, but we're just, okay, maybe he makes some other comparison, but be aware, this is Sam Harris editorializing here, perpetuated by the Clinton administration. But let us now ask some very basic questions that Chomsky seems to have neglected to ask himself. This is the next problem here. So, one, we'll just list them out here. Chomsky makes moral... Oh boy, that was terrible. Equivalence. Next one is... Chomsky has not asked himself about intentions. These are the two sticking points, and we're going to bold them here. Bold them. These are the two sticking points that are going to derail this entire conversation, as whatever you would call it, from Sam Harris. Because Sam Harris is simply not going to understand that these two things right here are false. And they are just plain incorrect, and Sam Harris will not account for the fact that he was demonstrably incorrect on this matter. So he says Chomsky doesn't think about intentions. What did the U.S. government think it was doing when it sent cruise missiles to Sudan, destroying a chemical weapons site used by Al-Qaeda? Did the Clinton administration intend to bring about the deaths of thousands of Sudanese children? No. Was our goal to kill as many Sudanese as we could? No. Were we trying to kill anyone at all? Not unless we thought the members of Al-Qaeda were there. If we are inclined to follow Chomsky down the path of moral equivalence and ignore the role of human intentions, we can forget about the bombings of Al-Shifa plant because many other things we did not do in Sudan has greater consequence. Blah blah blah. So he's going to put a lot of stuff here, and mostly it's just a lot of fear of Islam, Islamophobia, general terrible. We are actually that some societies are better than others. They have more moral wealth. We're better than them. Blah blah blah. So here's the funny thing. All right, so before we move on, because again, he's just rambling, and this really isn't important at this point because Chomsky. These are the two things that Chomsky will be having taken issue with. But it is interesting, again, the rewriting of history, and this Sam Harris suffers from very much a presentism kind of historical perspective. Is that he assumes that the moral and ideological structures of today are somewhat similar to the ones in the past, and more importantly, that because we eventually change in some way that somehow makes us better, it's a kind of faulty thing. But this idea that consider the horrors that Americans perpetrated at My Lai in 19 or My Lai in 1968, where we absolutely butchered 500 villagers. It was a horrific massacre perpetrated by the U.S. military. This is about as bad as humans beings are capable of behaving, but what distinguishes us from many of our enemies is that this indiscriminate violence appalls us now. It appalls us now, but it did not appall us necessarily back in the day. Again, if you actually look at polls, or if you look at kind of the temperature, the social temperature of how people thought about the My Lai thing, now part of it is because information was to some degree restricted, but even then, not enough information was restricted for them to not come to the conclusion that it was bad. The general polling back then is that people were more upset at the pilot, the helicopter pilot, who famously stopped it, kind of even threatened soldiers. I believe he was dishonorably discharged. He was harassed for years by American population and members of the public and armed forces. And in general, the overall opinion on this was at best mixed, if not in favor of, well, it might be a little bad, but wars, sometimes you got to break a couple eggs in war, and sometimes things get a little bad. We gotta stop them commies. We gotta fight this war. Again, the war was generally unpopular to a certain degree, but this idea that the violence appalled us is absolutely ahistorical. One, both at the time, and two, it took decades of people teaching, talking about, studying, and bringing this up before it became common moral knowledge that this was a bad event. Now, you might say maybe our society is good is because we have the ability to do so through the education or whatever, but this is false. On its surface, it's kind of false. The massacre at My Lai is remembered as a signature moment of shame for the American military now, but that took decades. That took decades for the mass public, for the military, for most people to come to this conclusion. Even at the time, U.S. soldiers were dumbstruck with horror by the behavior of the comrades. One helicopter pilot who arrived on the scene orders his subordinates to use their machine guns against their own troops if they would not stop killing villagers. Again, this guy was, I believe, court-martialed for this. And his troops were kind of, I think their ass was put in a bit of a sling. I don't remember if they were court-martialed. And he was harassed by people. He was seen as a traitor. This idea, yes, congratulations. Somebody seeing these things, the events, were horrified by it. But the mass public kind of psychology, the culture, treated this guy, the one guy who ordered it, the helicopter pilot, as a traitor. This is bullshit. This is this kind of weird, again, presentism, to where you take the knowledge of what we think right now and you just apply it back then, and you kind of miss some major problems. Again, he wants to always look at mostly this is just a lot of anti-Islam. Muslims are just barbarians who are stuck in the past, blah 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 blah. It's mostly useless to this. Fourth email. Because again, Chomsky's not going to take the bait on any of the Islamophobia. Doesn't really necessarily care. The example you cite illustrates very well why I do not see any point in public discussion. Here's the passage to which you refer. So again, he pulled a citation from him way here. Remember, this is the only thing he cited, really, from Chomsky. This little bit right here, and then he kind of summarizes to his own points. He summarizes Chomsky's points, but he doesn't really cite it. So now Chomsky's going to show you the entire context of what he's talking about. Here's the passage to which you refer. Or take the destruction of the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant in Sudan. One little footnote in the record of state terror quickly forgotten. What would the reaction have been if the bin Laden network had blown up half the pharmaceutical supplies in the U.S. and the facilities for replenishing them? We can imagine, though the comparison is unfair, the consequences are vastly more severe in Sudan. That aside, if the U.S. or Israel or England were to be the target of such an atrocity, what would the reaction be? In this case, we say, oh well, too bad, minor mistake, let's go on to the next topic, let the victims rot. Other people in the world do not react like that. When bin Laden brings up that bombing, he strikes a resonant chord, even among those who despise and fear him, and the same, unfortunately, is true of much of the rest of his rhetoric. Though it is merely a footnote, the Sudan case is nonetheless highly instructive. One interesting aspect is the reaction when someone dares to mention it. I have in the past and did so again in response to queries from journalists shortly after 9/11 atrocities. I mentioned that the toll of the horrendous crime of 9/11 committed with wickedness and awesome cruelty, quoting Robert Fisk, may be comparable to the consequences of Clinton's bombings of the Al-Shifa plant in August 1998. So, again, he's not saying that they are equivalent. At most, they are comparable in consequence. Not necessarily strictly morality, but certainly in consequence. That plausible conclusion elicited an extraordinary reaction, filling many websites and journals with feverish and fanciful condemnations, which I'll ignore. The only important aspect is that single sentence, which on closer look appears to be an understatement, was regarded by some commentators as utterly scandalous. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that at some deep level, however they may deny it to themselves, they regard our crimes against the weak to be as normal as the air we breathe. Our crimes for which we are responsible as taxpayers for failing to provide massive reparations, for granting refuge and immunity to the perpetrators, and for allowing the terrible facts to be sunk deep in the memory hole. All of this is of great significance, as it has been in the past. So what did he actually say when he talked about the Al-Shifa thing? Does he strictly say it is morally comparable or anything like that? No. What he is mostly looking at here is how we perceive this violence, at least in this particular passage, is this. How we perceive it. We perceive when the U.S. or Israel or England does actions like the Al-Shifa thing, we go, oh well, too bad, minor mistake, let's go on to the next topic, let the victims rot. When it happens to us, we treat it as a horrendous crime with the wickedness and awesome cruelty. Simply put, is that, again, when we do it, it is an... Is it? Oopsie. Oopsie. We'll just do it. It is a mistake. Quickly forgotten and normalized. just the way it has to be, just the way it happens. Oh well. And we just move on it. When it happens to us, it is a crime and horrible. Horrible. Any comparison. Okay, just, I hate this fucking keyboard. I cannot type on this. Comparison to our, I cannot type, our crimes elsewhere is seen as the greatest of offense. It is terrible and horrible. How can you possibly do this? Again, if these things are somewhat comparable in basic material thing, then at the core, if the objective reality is similar, then the only difference is the subjects. The only difference is the people. Again, we don't see them as the same. And we will condemn people who make this comparison. It goes on to review the only evidence available. We do not investigate our crimes, indeed bar investigation of them, which is from quite credible sources, estimating that casualties might well have been in the tens of thousands. This is another thing, been very factual. For the most part, we don't actually investigate our crimes, not particularly well. We do oftentimes bar the investigation of them based upon, state secrets, security, blah, blah, blah. We prevent other people and other organizations we belong to, such as the UN, for investigating and or engaging in this kind of stuff. If we don't want them to, we stop them from doing it. So this is really problematic. Your response is interesting both for what it does not say and what it does say. What it does not do is answer the question remains. What would the reaction have been if the bin Laden network had blown up half the pharmaceutical supplies in the U.S. and the facilities for replenishing them? We can imagine, though the comparison is fair, the consequences are vastly more severe in Sudan. That aside, if the U.S. or Israel or England were to be the target of such atrocity, what would our reaction be? So again, Chomsky kind of points out that you read this passage, but you didn't engage with the actual philosophical question that the passage primarily puts forth. What would the reaction be if it was us? Simple. And again, according to Chomsky believes that anyone who cites this passage has a minimal responsibility to give their reaction. Failure to do so speaks volumes. Again, Chomsky is a very, 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 very strong academic, in the sense that for the most part, he is very meticulous in his research, and he's very meticulous in this in his kind of answers. So if he's going to quote somebody, he's going to deal with all of the natural and necessary aspects and functions of that quote and of that passage. He's not just going to pull a little quote mine, a little cherry pick thing, and then move the hell on. And he's not going to ignore the major rhetorical and the major philosophical and logical aspects of this. Sam Harris doesn't really do this at all. So, next issue here. Let's turn to what you say. Let's turn to what you did say. A disquisition on the moral equivalency. You failed to mention, though, I did not suggest that they are morally equivalent. Notice again, misquoting, misunderstanding. And again, in print, this is a deadly sin for Chomsky. He's not going to misquote anybody. And to be misquoted is a dreadful insult and shows a deep, unserious nature. Sam Harris should know this, but he was lazy. He wanted to write some quick pop culture, emotionally driven book that wanted to basically do whatever political thing he wanted. It doesn't really matter what his intentions were. Is that he messed up. Suggests that they are more equivalent and in fact indicate quite the opposite. That's what he said. I did not describe the Al-Shifa bombing as a horrendous crime committed with wickedness and awesome cruelty. Rather, I pointed out that the toll might be comparable, which turns out on inquiry, which is not undertaken here and which apologists for crimes ignore, turns out to be quite likely a serious understatement. Again, he's looking at this. He just wants to look at the objective facts of this and then draw from those objective facts what can we understand about how we engage with these kind of ideas and these actions. You must also ignore the fact that I already responded to your claim about lack of intention, which frankly I find quite shocking on elementary moral grounds. This is the next major thing. Again, remember, moral equivalency doesn't make moral equivalency. As Chomsky pointed out in his fourth email, he does not make a moral equivalency. 2, the next big thing that Chomsky claims in that email and in that section that he quotes, that he says Chomsky does not ask the question about intentions. Chomsky absolutely has. Not just in that work, but in many of his works. Chomsky is a philosopher. He's absolutely asked about intentions all the time. In a different book he did, but here's the problem, and he's going to prove it, is that Sam Harris didn't read up on Chomsky. He didn't do his due diligence as an academic to see what is Chomsky's thoughts on intentionality when it comes to crimes, or something like that. Especially even on like the specific crime of the Sudan bombing, because he did, as he's going to say right here, he has looked at the intentionalities, or at least given his idea and opinion upon intentions. So, Sam Harris, the only way Sam Harris could say that Chomsky hasn't asked himself about these things is because Harris didn't even do the most basic elementary kind of style, sophomore college style research on Chomsky. He literally just found some random quote from Chomsky that he got all hot and bothered about. And instead of going back there, he decided he just wanted to take aim at anybody who criticizes American foreign policy because he wants American foreign policy to destroy Islam and Islamic countries because he hates them because they're all jihadists and they're all terrible. And that's his ideology. That's Harris's ideology. He didn't do any good academic research because this is pretty easy to find. You can even find it here in a book released around the same time period, certainly probably available to Harris. Chomsky talks about these things. Hence, it is simply false to assert that your basic question is one that Chomsky seems to have neglected himself. Quite the contrary, I asked myself right away and responded appropriately, I believe, to your subsequent charges. The following is from Radical Priorities, 2003. Most commentary on the Sudan bombings keeps to the question of whether the plant was believed to produce chemical weapons. True or false, that has no bearing on the magnitude with which the aggression interfered with key values in the society attacked, such as survival. Others point out that the killings were unintended. Oh, look at that. Literally, if you just literally read some of his work, another work that was contemporary to your own work, and probably even emailed him. You could have emailed him back then too, or written to him. You probably would have found out what does he think about the intentions, specifically regarding the example of the Sudan bombing that you want to cite Chomsky's talking about. Here he talks about it. The killings were unintended, as are many of the atrocities we rightly denounce. In this case, we can hardly doubt that the likely human consequence were understood by the U.S. planners. The acts can be excused then only on the Hegelian assumption that Africans are mere things whose lives have no value, an attitude that accords with practice in ways that are not overlooked among the victims, who may draw their own conclusions about the moral orthodoxy of the West. To explain this, in this case, so they say, what does he say about intentions here? Simple. As in this case, we can hardly doubt that the likely human consequences were understood by U.S. planners. So, here's the thing. Either they knew the consequences and did it anyway. Let's actually put this possible consequences and did anyway, or they didn't know the possible consequences. It does not matter, because the moral aspect, which he doesn't want to talk, it doesn't talk too much about here, is the same. The moral aspect, let's actually say moral cost / aspect is the same. Mere things. The quote from, again, Hegelian, again, he's talking about Hegel. And Hegel has a distinction between like subjects and mere things. So objects and subjects. So he's kind of doing a little quote here, is that Africans, in this case, the Sudanese, were so inconsequential. This is like worrying about, did you know that when you pulled into the driveway today, you were going to run over a anthill and kill hundreds of ants and destroy their work? Now, here's the question like this. Did you intend on doing this? Did you know it was a possibility? In this case like this, okay, either you knew it was a possible consequence pulling into your driveway and you did it anyway, which means that you may not have intended directly to kill them, but you knew they were there. You knew it was a highly likely possibility, but it didn't fucking matter. You may be sad that they're all dead, but you don't care. It is of lower hierarchical kind of process beyond, I want to pull into my driveway. That's more important, more significant than these mere things. If you didn't know it was a possible consequence, like you knew the anthill was there, but you didn't really know that it was you were going to drive over it or that your tires were hit, then you did so little investigation. You didn't care enough about their lives to actually investigate whether or not this was a possibility, which means that you treated them as mere things, which means that, again, they aren't that important and they are of no value. Thus, again, as he says right here, this attitude is in accordance and matches onto the practices that are not overlooked by the people who suffer from them and who then draw their own conclusions, sometimes even extremist conclusions, about the moral orthodoxy of the West. If the West is claiming that, hey, you want America to come to your country and bring you the morality of the West, but they're constantly seeing what the morality of the West looks like is that they are seen as mere things of no value if Western interests collide with their value. Again, there's a little bit of snippy thing right here to where, again, and the biggest thing is that Sam Harris published this bullshit. That's what pisses Chomsky off, is that Sam Harris published this without doing even the basic due diligence here. Sam Harris' response sucks. We appear to be running into the weeds here. Why are the weeds a problem? If you want deep conversation, Again, he wanted a conversation and a debate with him, and now he's complaining that what, we're getting too deep in the weeds. No, this was fairly accurate. This wasn't deep in the weeds. You compare how long and how much he quoted bullshit that he quoted from his own book. Chomsky, quite frankly, points out two very quickly. He deals with the two primary things that he has. One, I don't make a moral equivalence. That was a lie you said. I don't make moral equivalencies on this subject. What I ask is merely about the moral, at best you could maybe say how we perceive morality, not necessarily whether or not the things are moral, but how morality is perceived based upon who does what, to who, and also the idea that you present pretty strongly that he didn't ask these questions about himself. That's it. The rest of what you talk about here is nonsensical and not important at all, Harris. What Chomsky is taking issue with is two very specific points, because he's not going to litigate everything. He's just going to talk about these 2 points. That's it. That's all that really matters to him, is that you technically lied and misquoted and misattributed to a amateurish level Chomsky's points. Chomsky's bringing up the 2 points. Here we are. 2 observations before I recommend a fresh start. Again, why a fresh start? Like, this isn't too hostile. This isn't too whatever. It is blunt and straightforward, but there's no hostility here. There's no need for a fresh start. Again, this reminds me again of this kind of pathetic appeal to civility and I hate this keyboard. I don't know why it types the way it does, but it's awful. Appeal to civility and just kind of this content production. Let's not get too hostile. Let's make sure that we're keeping all nice and friendly so we can keep talking and keep producing content, keep doing these things. Let's keep it civil. There's nothing uncivil about this. There's no need for a fresh start. I have not read Radical Priorities. I treated your short book 9/11 as a self-contained statement on the topic. I do not think it was unethical or irresponsible for me to do. Kinda is. It is kind of silly to do. Especially if you know, and you know this, that this book is part of a body of work of this academic. Sure, you can treat it as just a self-contained thing, but this is sophomoric levels. This is sophomoric to the extreme. This isn't like some close reading of a singular standalone kind of novel story, something like that from an author. But even then, like this, to ignore, especially at an academic level, a high level academic level that you want to attain to ignore other writings by that author that may influence or otherwise be something like, if you want to understand, like, what did this author mean when they wrote this book, or how do they imagine these philosophical moral things that they're doing with this fictional story? What is being contained in here? If you just treat the book on its own, sure, that's fine, but you should probably make it a grand announcement that you are not, that this is just about this book. You're doing some death of the author. Ultimately, it's not really workable. If you want to know the author's intention and speak to their thoughts and ideas, you need to look not just at that singular text, but probably there is a body of work outside of that text that gives context to it, that gives an understanding. So when he says X, you know this is what he means when he makes these references. This is how he sees the world. 2. So again, I will bring up major issues, is that if you are going to say that a author believes X based only on one reading, you are not doing responsible academic work, as key notions necessary to understanding their point of view is or may lie outside of the text. Again, this is very sophomoric. This is undergrad, low undergrad level bullshit. That's the first major thing I would say. Again, you can sometimes do this to a certain degree, and it's not too bad, but it is not great. I've done this, and I probably will do it too. But if someone calls me out on this, I will have to say, okay, fair enough. I do think maybe it might be a good idea to always try to make reference to this. And I'm going to be honest, it's hard to tell because I didn't see, again, if this is from the 9/11 book that he says, I see plenty of evidence to suggest that he addresses the intentionality, and that honestly his quotation and his kind of summarization of what Chomsky says about this in 9/11 in regard to the Al-Shifa thing, I don't think what he does is accurate. So even if you treated the short book as self-contained statement, you're still desperately misunderstanding it. His second claim here, or his second thing or defense, is that haven't addressed moral significance of intentions, which if you have any reading comprehension, you would know Chomsky literally just did that, in that stated intentions are not what's the word I'm looking for? Are not significant in understanding moral reality and consequences of the actions. It's not particularly important or even significant. Again, it might be interesting to some degree, just from a personality standpoint, but it doesn't really tell you much about the morality of the action. Like, you can maybe just want to talk about intentions, which fine, you're arguing about psychology of an individual, and you're talking about individual psychology, perhaps, but you're not really talking about philosophical morality, or you're not talking about consequence, cause and effect kind of aspects. You're not talking about the larger scale things which he's dealing with. More importantly, Chomsky did. That the intentions can be measured or are significantly modified by the subject's position or the subject's nature, and not anything important, we might say. Again, this is where he gets into is that when we do it, it's an oopsie daisy. When they do it, it's a moral travesty. The only thing that we might be able to draw from that is how we view it, and how intentions are only brought up as a justification and re-justification of a predetermined moral stance. We'll get into that later, but that's important right here. I might even make that a subpoint here. Intentions are only brought up to justify and illuminate a predetermined moral conclusion and perspective. They are not in themselves illuminating or otherwise significant, only in revealing again, it's kind of one of those things where, like, if you have it's kind of one of those points where if someone makes a statement about X, sometimes their statement has less to do with the nature of X, and it's not particularly useful because it either doesn't comport with reality, doesn't do anything objectively. But what you can then say is, like, this says more about the speaker than it does about the object being spoken about. That's kind of the idea here. So, I'm happy to answer your question. What would I say about Al Qaeda or any group if it destroyed half the pharmaceutical supplies in the US? It would depend on what they intended to do. Again, he wants to only talk about intention. Jesus, can't type today. All right. He only wants to talk about intentions. It would depend on what they intend to do. Consider the following possibility. Imagine that Al Qaeda is filled not with God intoxicated sociopaths intent on creating a global caliphate. Again, he has to throw in as much as he can about, Islam is evil. But genuine humanitarians, based on their research, they believe that a deadly batch of vaccine. Now, notice again, this is just a hypothetical. So, Harris retreats from reality to a fantastical hypothetical scenario. This is going to be an issue with Chomsky. Because again, Chomsky wants to deal with reality. He doesn't want to deal with these fantastical hypothetical scenarios because we have literal reality. We have actions that are not that are comparable as far as material objective things are concerned. We can compare them to some degree. They are not morally equivalent, but they are somewhat comparable in the general sense and how we would perceive them. So, again, continue, and again, he has to make this whole thing. They're genuine humanitarians. Again, how do we know that they're genuine humanitarians? Like, how do we know this definitively? You're creating a scenario that doesn't make sense. But based on the research, they believe that a deadly batch of vaccine has made it into the U.S. pharmaceutical supply. They have communicated their concerns to the FDA, but were rebuffed. Acting rashly with the intention of saving millions of lives, they unleashed a computer virus targeted to impede the release of this deadly vaccine. As it turns out, they are right about the vaccine, but wrong about the consequences of their meddling, and they wind up destroying half the pharmaceuticals in the U.S. So let's just deal with his really stupid hypothetical here for a second. This is pretty bad, but we'll explain how bad it is. So, he is saying that this is somewhat similar or could be comparable to the situation in Sudan. So, in Sudan, was the U.S. bombing the pharmaceutical thing to save the Sudanese people? Or to save a bunch of people? Again, they thought, or the stated claims was that there was chemical weapons being made in the Sudanese factory. So this is why he's trying to make this. The problem is that one, there is no connection. They're not contacting, the US didn't contact the FDA in this scenario. They did not realistically believe that there was a deadly batch of vaccine, to continue with this metaphorical comparison. Their intentions were not to save millions of lives because they had no idea whether or not this virus, this bad batch of vaccine would actually be made, and they had little evidence that it was actually even being made, and then it destroys it accidentally. There was no accident. They absolutely understood what would happen. So again, these things, this is simply not comparable. It doesn't work. What would I say? I would say that this was a very unfortunate event. But these people are we want on our team. That's a fun little thing right there. And again, for someone who wants to talk about how Islam and all these people are crazy collectivists or whatever, who are trying to trying to impose a caliphate and who are trying to do this absolute, we're the only good people, everyone else are just evil apostates, blah 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 blah, or infidels. This pe again, people we want on our team. And two, I don't know if I want these people on our team. So the question we had is, do we really want them on our team? And what the fuck does that even mean? I would find the FDA highly culpable for not having effectively communicated with them. What if they did and they were wrong about it? What if they did and it's just not... It's really passing the buck on this one. These people are our friends, and we were very unlucky. Really, that's how you would perceive if a foreign government, foreign institution, who are good people, who say their intentions were 100% good, and maybe even they were right, decided to do an action that destroyed, either they knew it would destroy, had the possibility, or they didn't even think about it. Remember the anthill problem. They didn't even think about what would happen if they released this computer virus, destroyed half the pharmaceuticals in the US, resulting probably in hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of unnecessary deaths. Sam Harris is trying to say he, in that situation, would view these people as good people, friends, and we were very unlucky. Horse shit. 2. Al-Qaeda is precisely as terrible a group as it is, and it destroys our pharmaceuticals intentionally for the purpose of harming millions of innocent people. What would I say? We should imprison and kill these people at first opportunity. While the body count might be the same, these are totally different scenarios. Ethically speaking, intention is nearly the whole story. That's his argument right there. Intention is nearly the whole story. So again, the reason why I like to point this one out is that this exposes the major issue with American foreign policy, American exceptionalism, American chauvinism, and the general problem with liberal, kind of maybe capital L liberal, with ideology. Is that liberal ideology really focuses on the individual, their individual, and tends to focus very heavily on intention. But this is a very privileged kind of perspective to where you should judge me by what I wanted to do and not by my actions, but by what I wanted to come about from these actions. And that can have influence depending on how you look at it. But ultimately, if you think about it in that kind of sense, like this, no, I didn't intend on causing any harm. Most people would say like, well, maybe, but no matter what, that doesn't stop you from being punished. It might mitigate it to a certain degree, but you still should be punished. And in many cases, this is not a particularly good defense, because like with the case of the anthill, if you have all of the knowledge to know the consequences of your actions, or to have a very strong, reasonable understanding that these will be the consequences of your actions, whether or not you intend those actions to happen doesn't matter. Again, I want to roll down this giant concrete ball down a hill because the only intention I want, the intention I am intending with this rolling, this giant concrete ball, is for it to smash into a wall and make a big noise and be super cool. I see that there are dozens of children playing on this grassy hill, and at the bottom of the grassy hill, there are spaces maybe to where the ball could roll through without hitting them, kind of like some kind of Frogger thing to where it somehow manages to pass in between the kids running and playing. And I push the ball because I then say and declare, it is not my intention anyone be hurt by this. And then the ball rolls down and rolls over all those kids. Is anyone going to give two rat shits or even believe of my stated intention that I do not intend on harming these kids? Or if I don't bother looking at, I know kids play at the bottom of this field, but I don't know if it's empty or clear or not. And I simply roll the ball up the hill without looking at the bottom of the meadow, the bottom of the hill where all the kids play sometimes. I don't even bother looking. And I just shout out, I just want this ball to hit the wall. And I roll it down, and it rolls over dozens of kids. You might say, well, maybe I could possibly mitigate it, but ultimately I feel like this is kind of it's your moral duty to investigate and to understand the consequences of your actions. So either way, either it's through extraordinary ignorance to the point where, again, you consider the children ultimately mere things when in comparison to the outcome you want. I want to destroy this wall. That is more important than the lives of children or the potential lives of children. Moreover, as he will then bring up, is that stated intentions are even more suspect than just the objective knowledge of an intention. Even if we were to say we know definitively this was their intention, it still feels a little bit silly to ignore reality and the consequences from just based on intentions. So, we're on to the 6th email. Again, there's a back and forth, and it goes back and forth, and ultimately we might end up cutting this short just because we're going to hit a point where Noam Chomsky is going to be incredibly patient. He's so patient. Even though he's somewhat blunt, he's incredibly patient with his time with Sam Harris, despite the fact that Sam Harris just doesn't seem to fucking get it. So, in general, we started with the things. I don't circulate private correspondence without authorization, but I'm glad to authorize you to send this correspondence to Krauss and Harry, who you mentioned. He's mentioned this before. You want to send this back there, whatever. I'm sorry you were unwilling to retract your false claim that I ignore the moral significance of intentions. Of course I did, as you know. I I gave the appropriate answer, which applies accurately to you in the Al-Shifa case, the very case in question. So again, Chomsky's pissed because notice what he didn't really... He kind of addressed this, but not really. He just said, well, okay, so you talk about radical priorities, but I don't think it was unethical or irresponsible to just treat this as its lone source, despite the fact that even in that lone source, you could probably still see that he does kind of talk about intentionality to some degree. And again, you wrote about if you don't see him talk about intentions in that book, then don't bring it up because you can't make any prescriptions like, oh, he doesn't deal with intentions at all regarding this or anything else. Maybe he just didn't cover it in that specific book because that book was talking about something different or something similar, but not 100% related, and he did not speak on this particular thing. It is amateurish of you and really poor form, to some degree even unethical and irresponsible for you to do this. And again, this is just a microcosm of this, is that Harris is literally embodying the issue Chomsky has with American liberal ideology and intentions. Harris says Miss quote, and again, how does he phrase it here? And false claim not intentional, but ignores the responsibility and the information that was available to him to avoid this mistake. Again, if you again, you could say we could put some different scenarios. Say there's a lake that is highly toxic and poisonous. Father takes his daughter down there to swim. There are dozens of signs all over the goddamn place that say, do not swim in here, highly toxic, you will die. Extremely dangerous for children. The father sees many of these signs, but he also sees one sign that says, this lake has a diving board. Which, okay, I assume if it had a diving board, it's like, yeah, it had a diving board, but due to runoff, spill off, it's been in the news for 5 days now. There's been a massive toxic thing. Don't swim in this lake. There are signs posted anywhere, big red and yellow signs saying, do not swim in this lake. He then takes his daughter down to the lake and he throws her in, all having fun. She swims around while he sits on the side of on the bank, drinking beer. She comes out, he drives her off, takes her home, she dies. Are we going to say, well, we can't really blame him because it wasn't his intention for his daughter to die in this lake? Because, he didn't intend on it. He didn't see the other signs. They were all over the place. Either you willfully missed it, or you were so wrapped up in your own bullshit and so desperate to reach the conclusion, your daughter swimming in the pond, in the lake, that you ignored literal signage telling you that this was not a good idea or that this was incorrect. Harris is literally embodying the issue that Chomsky has with American foreign policy, specifically the Al-Shifa thing, is that Harris can say all he wants about his intentionality. The simple matter of fact is that nobody forced him to write this immediately and publish it immediately. Nobody forced him to do this. Nobody said, hey, you can only read this one book. He chose to only read the one book. He chose to ignore the signage that was even in the quote he cited and talked about, that, or to some degree, that he must have read to pull the quotes that he cited. He had to have seen that there was some indication, some signage that maybe Chomsky is talking about intentionality, but he doesn't seem to care about it. Why not? I'm sorry, as an academic, it's your responsibility. You had signs of a lack of information, and rather than trying to go find and see if that information exists elsewhere, you just assumed this information doesn't exist. That's shitty. That's stupid. That is unethical and irresponsible. And again, notice again, he doesn't really retract it. He doesn't say, okay, I did not, again, he could have said right here, I did not think it was unethical or responsible for me to do so. However, it is clear that you did do this, that you did speak on these intentionalities, and even though I disagree with them, I was incorrect. If you would like, I can put forward in a newsletter or something like that a small correction to these matters. I can't change the publication necessarily, but I can at least post for others who might read this. Hey, I misquoted and misunderstood, and I falsely made a false claim about Chomsky in this book, in this earlier book of mine, 10 years ago. It was an issue. Again, but the ego won't let him. His exceptionalism won't let him do this. I would do this instantly. If I did that, I would absolutely say, okay, I misunderstood that. I missed that. Even if I still disagree, I might say, I still disagree and I think you undersell intentions, blah, 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 blah. However, I will admit I did miss that. You had talked about these things. Yes, so from a technical standpoint, you are correct. If you want, I'll put out a correction. I'm not losing any face by doing so. But again, as he says, you did not retract your claim. Also, I did give an appropriate answer, which applies accurately to you in the Al-Shifa case. If you had read it further beyond launching your accusations, the usual procedure and work intended to be serious. Now, Chomsky's getting a little bit kind of mean, but this is kind of, again, he treats publication as serious. It's not some bullshit art. It's not just some pop culture, get some headlines things. He treats it as the matter, as the record, as the matter of fact, objective record of things, or trying to be. And at least in an academic conversation. So, you need to do your due diligence. You wrote a book. It's not a short book. It took you probably a little while to write. It's not like you were pressed for time. Fucking do the research. If you had read further, you would have discovered that I also reviewed the substantial evidence about the very sincere intentions of Japanese fascists while they were devastating China, Hitler in the Sudetenland and Poland, etc. There is at least as much reason to suppose that they were sincere as Clinton was when he bombed Al-Shifa, much more so in fact. Therefore, if you believe what you are saying, you should be justifying their actions as well. I also reviewed other cases pointing out that professing benign intentions, and we'll kind of put this as a note, why intentions don't matter, or especially stated intentions by the perpetrator of the action are not important. Why? Again, professing benign intentions is the norm for those who carry out atrocities and crimes, even sincerely, and most abject apologists justify the actions on the grounds that the perpetrators, on the grounds that the intentions were good. This is, again, he's kind of going to that again, all perpetrators adopt a normal stance. The normal stance of criminals, normal criminal stance equals best intentions. They always say this. Every single criminal, the history of world crimes, war crimes, all that, always say they're doing it with the best intentions. Japanese fascists, they were just trying to create a good and noble empire, not just for the Japanese people, but but to give inspiration for the lesser beings so that they can fulfill their correct place as servants for the chosen people. Hitler in Sudetenland and Poland, and many more. They all believe these, probably even more so than whatever the intentions Clinton and his cabinet had said when they said why they bombed the Al-Shifa hospital. This is ultimately why he doesn't really care about the intentions, especially when it comes to the governmental stuff, is because it's just, they're always going to say this. They all say this. Why would intentions matter if no matter what you really do, the criminals of these type of crimes always say they're doing with the best of intentions? Then ultimately, when it comes to understanding moral good or some kind of objective, what is and is not right, anything like that, intentionality, especially stated intentionality, is somewhat silly. And also, people can lie. We can't 100% know what their intentions are. So rather than dealing into the impenetrable morass of individual psychology and whether or not this person truly did believe or not believe it, though that could be philosophically interesting for some kind of half-ass academic, or even for me, I sometimes enjoy doing that. But ultimately, it's kind of a lot of navel gazing, because this is what I might refer to as like an event horizon kind of question. Is that if you remember the Interstellar movie, they popularized, or they kind of brought this up, is that one of the big problems that they have is that all the data that they need to properly solve this gravity equation, the data is inside of a black hole, as they say, to summarize the movie very quickly. This is a problem, is that you can't get that data and then get it out. Once you go past a certain point, the event horizon, nothing escapes, not even light, or to some degree, some things do actually escape. But for the most part, nothing escapes that we can really work with. So the data, the information cannot be sent out. So it doesn't. So again, you enter into this thing to where you're entering into a black hole to where nothing can ever be 100% or even 60% or even 20 or 10% kind of 100% said. It just doesn't work. It might be fun to kind of play around in there, but ultimately nothing that you really say or do actually can significantly affect the outside world outside of that black hole. This is an event horizon kind of debate, which is why Chomsky doesn't give a shit. He can't read these minds of the people. And even if he did, it doesn't matter. Do we somehow say, well, okay, so this insane person truly believed they were trying to save people? Does that mean that we should not punish them for their crimes? That we should not lock them up in a mental institution for the rest of their life, or until they no longer believe these things? Is that somehow making the murder and death not as significant, not as painful? The objective results of these the consequences of these actions? It doesn't matter. So, again, I'm also sorry that you evade the fact that your charge of moral equivalency was falsely flat, as you know. Again, notice again, Chomsky's only going to respond to these two things, because these are the problems. Chomsky's kind of already laid them out. These were the issues. Harris is never going to address these, ever. He's not going to address them at all. He's just going to dance around and really complain and whine about how Chomsky's not going to talk about intentions. Despite the fact that Chomsky doesn't really care. We can't talk about that until you deal with the two things that you said that were falsely flat. Or those were flatly false, about me. In particular, I'm just sorry to see your total refusal to respond to the question raised at the outset of the piece. Again, you don't. It is kind of hilarious. Sam Harris didn't respond. He created a scenario that is ludicrous. Again, as he says, so ludicrous as to be embarrassing. It hasn't even the remotest relation to Clinton's decision. Again, you created a scenario that is so fantastical, so stupid, that it doesn't match on to the intentions, the ideologies, the objective reality of the example. Again, a metaphor or an analogy is only useful if it can be connected to the thing it's analogizing, or again, metaphor being a metaphor for of. So it's a silly one to do. It hasn't even the rose relation to Clinton's. Not because they had suddenly discovered anything remotely like what you fantasize here, or for the matter, any credible evidence at all, and by sheer coincidence, immediately after the embassy bombings, for which it was a retaliation, as widely acknowledged. That's the other thing that's kind of missing that he brings up, is that most people, even some people from the cabinet and others, have brought up, and other political individuals, political scientists, and politicians have brought up that part of the reason for the Al-Shifa bombing, a major motivation for bombing it, was in retaliation as punishment for embassy bombings that had happened in Sudan and I think neighboring countries. And of course, they knew there would be major casualties. They're not imbeciles, but rather adopt a stance as arguably even more immoral than purposeful killing, which at least recognizes the human status of victims, not just killing ants walking down the street. Who cares? Again, we could maybe argue about this, which one is worse or whatever, but again, to explain this again, they're not stupid. They knew that there would be casualties. They knew that this was the likely outcome. Again, they were not, again, this scenario right here completely, utterly, again, misses why this example doesn't work. This example doesn't work because the U.S. knew what the consequences of their meddling would be. In this case, he's trying to say Al-Qaeda wouldn't. But again, they knew. This is why this analogy, this scenario does not match on to anything that's being talked about. They weren't imbeciles. They knew it. But rather they simply took on, in this case, a potentially even more immoral stance, which sees these people as just ants. In fact, as you would know if you deigned to read before launching accusations, they were informed at once by Kenneth Roth of the HRW, Human Rights Watch, I believe, about the impending humanitarian catastrophe already underway. And of course, they had far more information available than the HRW did. So, if the HRW, which has less information than the Americans, knew that this was going to have a massive consequence, then it's likely that the American cabinet, the Clinton cabinet, knew that this would cause a catastrophe, and they still did it. Your own moral stance is revealed even further by your complete lack of concern about the apparent huge casualties and the refusal to even investigate them. As for Clinton and associates being genuine humanitarians, notice again, even though it was ridiculous, he's still willing to engage with this ridiculous hypothetical scenario. If they are actually genuine humanitarians, perhaps that explains why they're imposing sanctions on Iraq so murderous that both of the highly respected international diplomats who administer the oil for food program resigned to protest because they regard them as genocidal, condemning Clinton for blocking testimony at the UN Security Council, or why he pours arms into Turkey as it was carrying out a horrendous attack on its Kurdish population, one of the worst crimes of the 90s, or why he shifted Turkey from leading recipient of arms worldwide, Israel, Egypt accepted, to Colombia as soon as the Turkish atrocities achieved their goal, and while Colombia was leading the hemisphere by far in atrocious human rights violations, or why he had authorized the Texaco Oil Company to provide oil to the murderous Haitian junta in violation of sanctions, and on, as you could learn if you bothered to read before launching accusations and professing to talk about ethics and morality. Again, your comparison only works if Clinton and associates were actually trying to be genuine humanitarians. But his previous actions show that he's not a particularly good humanitarian. So it doesn't work. I've seen apologetics for atrocities before, rarely at this level, not to speak of the refusal to withdraw false charges, a minor fault in comparison. Since you profess to be concerned about God-intoxicated sociopaths, perhaps you can refer to me to your condemnation of the perpetrator of by far the worst crime of this millennium, because God had instructed him that he must smite the enemy. No point wasting time on your unwillingness to respond to my request that you reciprocate by referring to me to what I have written, citing your published views. If there's anything I've written that is remotely as erroneous as this, put it aside moral judgments, I'd be happy to correct. So again, I haven't done or at all written about anything about you that is as erroneous. We'll just forget that, I guess. Plainly, there's no point pretending to have a rational discussion. But I do think you would do your readers a favor if you presented your tale about why Clinton bombed al-Shifa and his grand humanitarianism. That is surely the least you can do given your refusal to withdraw what you know to be completely false charges. So, why don't you tell us why you think al-Shifa? How does Sarah Harris respond to this? Oh boy. Well, again, I don't think Harris has ever actually had somebody talk to him in a stern but very academic manner. I think he's been given softballs for such a long time, and he's only ever debated, like, again, Christian apologetics. But he's getting trounced here, and he just is so, his ego is so hurt by it. Unfortunately, you are now misreading both my silences and my statements. Again, there's no misreading. He accurately and effectively counters it. And I cannot help but feel that peremptory and censorious attitude you have brought to what, again, where's the censorship? What is this? What do you mean? How is he censoring you? Censoring? Silence? How are you trying to silence? Again, this... It's just some civility weak-ass shit, man. Absolutely ridiculous. You have brought to what would, in fact, be a perfectly collegial exchange is partly to blame. You appear to have begun this dialogue at or very near the end of your patience. Again, not really. The guy's responded to you several times through email, despite the fact that you're not really actually engaging with the conversation particularly well. And then this, if we were to publish it, I would strongly urge you to edit what you have written, removing unfriendly flourishes such as you know, the usual procedure in work intended to be serious, ludicrous and embarrassing, total refuser. Notice again, Sam Harris started a little bit with attitude in his previous emails. And again, this is just this crying victim. I trust that certain of your acolytes would love to see that master in high dungeon, believing as you seem to that you are in the process of mopping the floor with me. But the truth is that your emotions are getting the better of you. I'd rather not you not look like the dog who caught the car. Again, this appeal to I'm doing this for your benefit. You know, I would strongly urge you to edit this because you're coming across as so irrational. There's nothing irrational here. Again, look back at those emails and then try to imagine how the hell is Sam Harris coming to this other than he is just the biggest fucking bitch. And he is desperately trying to make it so that, well, no, hold on a second. You know, Chomsky's really, really smart and I'm really smart. We should be agreeing on these things. Like, it doesn't, like, my identity as a smart, intellectual, logical person is being destroyed in front of me by somebody who's pointing out that I'm illogical, but that can't be. I'm logical. Like, again, this is just so sad. Despite your apparent powers of telepathy, I am not evading anything. You are. Your scenario deliberately evaded many of the basic facts of the matter, and you created just a pretty crappy hypothetical to deal with that rather than deal with reality. The fact that I did not address every point raised in your last email is due to the fact that I remain confused about how you view the ethical significance of intentions. And I answered your central question in such a way as to clarify this point. I had hoped. I was not drawing an analogy between my contrived case of the Al-Qaeda being great humanitarians in the Clinton administration. The purpose of that example was to distinguish the ethical importance of intentions. Even so. Okay, so here's what he's explaining right here is he's trying to explain that the reason for the extreme analogy was to showcase how intentions matter. But again, this one didn't really answer his question because he wasn't asking about intentions. He was asking about your how you would view these actions if they were done to America. And again, the ultimate question is, again, this, you're like, oh, I only care about what their intentions were, not the consequences. Okay, then I guess either at best this is just either, you know, talking past each other, or Harris is refusing to acknowledge that intentions don't really give us a lot to work with. More importantly, how the hell are you still confused about Chomsky's understanding and his analysis of intentions when it comes to state actors like Clinton administration or others? He literally in this last email gives quite a very succinct understanding of this, that this is something that everybody professes the best of intentions. So intentions ultimately from this perspective don't really offer us much useful information. How are you still confused? I was not drawing an analogy between a contrived case of Al-Qaeda being great humanitarians in the Clinton administration. The purpose of that example was to distinguish the ethical importance of intention given the same body count as clearly as possible. Okay, but then again, one, it's silly that you drew such a nonsensical analogy. Again, it's just such extremism to where if you have to go to such extremism to point out the importance of intention, then it feels like, I don't know, it feels like intention might not actually matter that much. And even if you want to make it matter to some degree, you seem to be, again, just misunderstanding to a horrific degree that it doesn't actually matter. People are still dead in the tens of thousands, and the intention, people say, doesn't matter. But even if we do, we could look at the intentionality, because Chomsky has somewhat addressed this, that again, intentions only matter if they are a, what you could use almost like the philosophical thing is a justified true belief. You have to have all things in there. One, it has to be something you actually believe. It has to be a true belief that you believe, one that you believe to be true. And then again, for the most part, this is somewhat self-reinforcing. And we do have to have some degree of justification for this to be true. That there has to be some agreed upon logical justification for the true belief or the true intention. What Chomsky is pointing out is that there's a great deal of circumstantial evidence and other actions and intentions and other actions taken by these people and whatnot that would suggest that their stated justified true belief of intention is not true, that it is inaccurate, that there is a desire to manipulate reality and to misrepresent it to justify the unjustifiable. The purpose of the example is to distinguish blah, blah, blah. On the topic of there being a moral equivalence between Al-Shifa and 9/11, I'm afraid that what you have written here is hard to understand. Despite your insistence that you drew no moral equivalence whatsoever between the two cases, you call Clinton's actions an atrocity. The consequences are vastly more severe if the same had been done to the U.S. And you say any comparison with the consequence of 9/11 is, if anything, an understatement. Yes, from an objective, consequential manner. Not equivalence, not morality. If you're going to get hung up on this semantic thing of atrocity, again, you might say that there's some, not moral equivalency, but there is moral significance. It's very difficult and oftentimes a silly endeavor to try to make something equivalent, one moral aspect equivalent to another moral aspect. That's kind of a faulty place to go, and that's not really going to work too well. That's not what he's doing. He's simply saying it has moral significance if you want to think of it as moral in any way, shape, or form. If you want to eventually do that, you might say that it is morally significant, but not equivalent. That doesn't mean it is lesser, and it doesn't mean that it's more. It means that you can't really compare things like this. But what you can do is compare the objective consequences of them. And if you want to then draw moral hierarchy to that, I guess, but ultimately, it's bad. Either way, it's bad. You then appear to be upbraiding me for not immediately detecting an important distinguish difference between a horrendous crime and an atrocity. I don't think he does. I don't know where he reads this. It's just bad reading comprehension. Is there one? You are, of course, the famous English, but I believe that the editors of OED would be nonplussed by this discovery. Again, notice the attitude. He's trying to accuse that, oh, you're being all attitude to me, but there's immediate attitude back. Perhaps you can state it plainly. What is the moral difference between Al-Shifa and 9/11? This isn't important in this conversation. Please don't interpret my silence on any other matters as a sign of my unwillingness to discuss it further or to have my views changed by a proper collision of evidence and argument. This proper collision, Jesus Christ. The fart smelling here. Fucking talk normally. And again, this constant appeal that, oh, I'm totally not running away. I totally illogical and I love the hard, difficult things. But then you're like complaining about we're getting lost in the weeds shit. This is what difficult conversations are. Step up. Again, but he wants to know the difference between altruism, however inept, negligence, and malevolence is absolutely clear, at least to him. Okay. Oh, God. Eighth email. Horrible. All right. Chomsky to Harris. Your effort to respond to that question that you avoided in your published article is, I'm afraid, indeed embarrassing and ludicrous. The question was about the Al-Shifa bombing, and it won't do to evade it by concocting an outlandish tale that has no relation whatsoever to the situation. So you're still evading the question. There takes no telepathy to perceive that. Again, very clearly, you are avoiding it. You are avoiding it because it is devastating to your reality where intentions matter more than effects. So let's face it directly. All right, so now he's going to give you a song thing. So this email, for most part, just details out the facts of the matter as best as possible. Clinton bombed Al-Shifa in reaction to the embassy bombings, having discovered no credible evidence in the brief interim, of course, and knowing full well that there would be enormous casualties. Apologists may appeal to the undetectable humanitarian intentions, but the fact is that the bombing was taken in exactly the way I described in the earlier publication, which dealt with the question of intentions in this case, the question you claimed falsely that I ignored. To repeat, it just didn't matter if lots of people are killed in a poor African country, just as we don't care if we kill ants when we walk down the street. So if you want to draw some moral understanding of there your moral understanding is that it didn't matter to them whether they intended to or not, as we described, whether the intention is through ignorance or through whatever, or again, misguided, complete and utter thing here. Ultimately, the consequence is the same, and the root cause of it is the fact that these people didn't matter if they lived or died. On moral grounds, that is arguable even worse than murder, which at least recognizes the victim as human. That is exactly the situation. And we are left with your unwillingness to address the very clear question that opened the passage you cite, instead offering evasions that are exactly as I described, and your unwillingness to address the crucial ethical questions about intentions. Again, ultimately, whether or not intentions really matter in these kind of scenarios. To adopt your terms, the matter of altruism, however inept, negligence, or malevolence is absolutely clear in the case of the Al-Shifa bombing. There wasn't even a hint of altruism, inept or not, so we can dismiss that. They weren't bombing this hospital because they were trying to protect the people of Sudan and around them from chemical weapons. There just wasn't. That wasn't realistically the thing. Considering the scenario, considering the timing with the bombings or whatever, it was clear that this was meant as a punishing attack against a hostile force. There is no altruism here. There was clear negligence. The fate of probably tens of thousands of African victims did not matter. So, again, negligence, deliberate or otherwise. They were told by the Human Rights Watch, by other organizations, and they knew, for the most part, that if you do this, it's not really going to harm the people you want to harm. And even what little harm that it will be done to them, it'll vastly harm innocent Sudanese civilians. As to whether there was malevolence, that depends on the ethical question I raised, which you seem to want to consider to repeat. How do we rank murder, which treats the victim as a human, with quite consciously killing a great number of people, but not caring because we treat them as we do ants when we walk down the street? The Al-Shifa case. Is this malevolence? Now, this is an interesting philosophical question. We can go back and forth. But is there a degree of malevolence in the actions of the giant who knows that there are lives that are underneath his feet, but walks anyway? Again, is this moral? Is there an ethical thing here? That would be an interesting question. Intentionality is a very sophomoric question. And further question, how do we regard citizens of the country that carried out this atrocity who seek to provide some justification in terms of clearly non-existent altruistic intentions? This is a bit of a snapback to Harris here, but it carries along with it. If we were to say, wow, ultimately, I think that giant is there's a degree of evil to his actions because he doesn't have to walk or do any of these things. He doesn't have to do this, but he just did it because he wanted to do it. And even if he says his intentions weren't to cause all this pain and suffering of where he steps, he still steps there. And he knows it's going to do this. But he doesn't need to do this. There is no existential crisis necessary to do this. It's merely he wants to do this. Then we can get to the next question, is that, okay, and there are people who constantly try to justify these actions, which we can see are morally questionable and ethically questionable at the very least. Then how do we judge people who then justify this on some appeal to an altruistic intention or some kind of good-willed intentions or ignorant intentions that somehow, again, this doesn't matter. As you know, apologies for the accuracy, I described 9/11 as a horrendous crime committed with wickedness and awesome cruelty. In the case of Al-Shifa, I said nothing of the sort. I described it as an atrocity, as it clearly is, and merely stated unquestionable facts. There is no moral equivalency, the term that has been regularly used since John Kirkpatrick to try to undercut critical analysis of the state one defends. Again, this is kind of some kind of moral relativism, that kind of the same problems of cultural relativism. There's this moral relativism to where you can't judge the actions of the state in this regard because they're morally good people just trying to do the best that they can. But it's just well, now hold on a second. This is getting a little silly. As for intentions, there's nothing to say in general. There is a lot to say about specific cases like the Al-Shifa bombing or Japanese fascists in China, who you should absolve on your grounds, since there's every reason to support that their intention was to bring earthly paradise was quite real, and other cases I've discussed, including Hitler and high Stalinist officials. So your puzzlement about my attitude towards intentions generally is quite understandable. There is no general answer. Accordingly, you give none, nor do I. I'm glad you're interested in looking at other cases I've discussed for 50 years. There's a little snapback right there, addressing exactly the questions you claim I ignored. These cases shed great light on the ethical question of how to evaluate benign intentions. As I've discussed for many years, in fact decades, benign intentions are virtually always professed, even by the worst monsters, and hence carry no information, even in the technical sense of the term. That's quite independent of their sincerity. However we determine that. We are left as we are. Again, this is the important thing. Again, he really is laying it out quite effectively here. Whether you agree or disagree, Chomsky is taking a decent amount of his time to really accurately and effectively kind of detail out the problem and why he thinks Harris's appeal to good intentions is non-informative and ultimately pointless and kind of silly and stupid, is because, again, you look in history, every single monster always professes benign intentions, good intentions. Thus, these intentions outside of the individual psychology, unless you're doing some kind of psychological study of how people can justify to themselves on an individual level evil and terrible actions, and kind of looking at psychological analysis, sure, but from a just more general philosophical or an even kind of moral philosophy or ethics study, that's not really that useful if we're trying to determine whether or not actions are good or evil in a broad sense like this, or if we're trying to criticize broader kind of aspects of culture and not getting lost in the weeds on the individual level. It's not particularly useful. So he ignored it. It's not really useful. And the only use it might have is, does it give some kind of understanding to how much knowledge they had at there and whether this comports to reality of how much knowledge and information they had access to. And again, as he said before, again, you made serious accusations that were quite false and are unwilling to withdraw them. Notice again, Sam Harris has not apologized or withdrawn his claims, which at this point, regardless of whether or not Harris is right or Chomsky's right about intentions, it is very clear that the claims that he published in his novel or his book, that Sam Harris published in his book, were false. Chomsky does deal with the ethics of this quite extensively. He dealt with it in the book, which he cited to a certain degree, and certainly in many others. So, at the very least, to keep the idea of civility alive, you would think Harris, somebody who's very concerned with civility at this point, who's constantly making whining fucking calls for civility, would at the very least acknowledge and go, yeah, I was wrong. Okay. Yeah, you aren't correct. I don't necessarily agree with your things, but it was stupid of me and overly reductive to say that you didn't talk about these issues. You refuse to consider, let alone answer, the very simple and straightforward question posed in the passage you cited. Again, Harris didn't answer the question. What he answered was the question that Chomsky didn't ask. Chomsky didn't necessarily ask about whether or not we think the intentions were good or not, or whether or not we believe their intentions. That wasn't the question. The question was more, what do we think about how do we view the moral actions of things which we justify based on intentions, despite the fact the intentions don't matter? Or more importantly, again, the question is this: how would we view, if we're going to say this is morally okay, ethically okay, how would we view it if it was done to us? Doesn't matter the intentions, because our intentions ultimately don't matter. As has been discussed extensively, the intentions shouldn't matter that much. If you want to talk about intentions, sure, but again, the question wasn't asking, do we care about intentions? Would we care about them? Sam Harris still really hasn't answered this. And again, you refuse to reciprocate, as I have properly requested several times. That means, ultimately, there's no basis for rational public discourse. You refuse to engage, thus rational discourse is impossible.
Now here's Sam. Sam has officially thrown in the towel, and he has taken his ball and running home because he's just a whiny little bitch about this. Well, let's chalk some of this up to the well-understood problem of email. This isn't a problem of email. The emails are very clear. You're just not, you just wanted to have a nice softball conversation with another intellectual who can validate your intellectualism by the presence of the conversation and their presence in it. You didn't want to talk about something. I doubt we would have achieved this level of cantankerousness in the face-to-face exchange. One, you don't know Chomsky. Chomsky doesn't mince words in person or otherwise. He absolutely would go about to this in the same degree of cantankerousness as you express, which again is not particularly cantankerous. I've seen way worse from academics. Way worse. And you can still work with it. You can still draw useful information even though they're being assholes about it. To the point about my refusing to reciprocate by referring to places where you have written about me or my work. I'm unaware of you having done so. That's kind of the point. That's kind of the point. You kind of missed the jab here, Harris, is that he's making a jab, is that I have never written about your work. This is what Chomsky's basically saying. I never wrote about your work, and I have never realistically misquoted you or otherwise made anything to the same degree of intellectual dishonesty that you have about me. Point me to here where you think this. And more importantly, you've kind of said to this degree. You haven't specifically cited where I said you were like a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. Finally, Harris is doing this. I'm aware of evidence. I have seen a video or two in which, when asked to commentate, again, cite the video, give some context, something. Do the bare minimum. Again, you're all doing this in one day or whatever. Why don't you just say you are right and correct with this? I will try to find a source, a citation quickly for this. You would think, again, with the fact that you're starting this conversation and Chomsky replies, it's all within about a day, probably taking over the case of several hours. You would think maybe, okay, like, look, go online and find where this happened, all right? Go online and try to find the video. Do the basic due diligence. I've seen a video too in which, when asked to comment about my views or about the views of the new atheism in general, you have said something disparaging. As I mentioned in my initial email, you have, at least on one occasion, referred to me as a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. You may have been talking about both Christopher Hitchens and me, given the way the question was posed. So then you already are saying, I'm not sure if you actually said this to me about me or not, or if you were saying about Christopher Hitchens, both me, or just Christopher Hitchens. Again, the history is unimportant. It actually is important. To Chomsky, when you say something, you mean it. When you write something, print something, you mean it. You don't just go off half-cocked. This is the important thing. You should reciprocate by going, here, this is the video in which you were talking about me. To me, it seems that you were talking about both me and Christopher Hitchens, or Christopher Hitchens and me, and say that we are a religious fanatic who worships a religion of the state. Just confirming, are you talking about me specifically here? Were you talking more about Christopher Hitchens? Clarify this point. And again, he doesn't, it makes more sense to deal with what we say in this exchange. Yeah, but you also are the one who brought this up. Unless I'm missing something, we scroll all the way back up. All the way back up. Good God, this is so long. Here we are, very first email. The fact, he says fact. Not that I saw a video where it appeared that you called me a religious fanatic who worships the original state. He says fact. Words matter, Harris. You're saying this is a factual matter. Chomsky wants you to cite it. You don't cite it, then it's not worth talking about at best. Or more importantly, he's pointing out to you that you aren't doing this. All right. Here's my assumption about the Al-Shifa case. I assume that Clinton believed that it was, in fact, a chemical weapons factory. because I see no rational reason for him to have intentionally destroyed a pharmaceutical plant in retaliation for the bombings. I take it that you consider this assumption terribly naive. Why so? This is really fucking stupid, by the way. This is terribly stupid. One, I see no rational reason for him to intentionally bomb a pharmaceutical plant in retaliation for MC bombings. Nations do this all the time. There is constant retaliation. That's kind of like saying, I see no reason like that. We retaliate with tariffs, we retaliate with embargoes, we retaliate with bombings and attacks. This is not at all. You would need to explain how there is no rational way or reasoning for him to have done this intentionally. It just doesn't. That's utterly naive and stupid. And he believed it to be a chemical weapons factory. Another factual statement. All right. So this is the facts. Are there facts that support Clinton believing it was legitimately a chemical weapons factory? And are there facts circumstantial that might give a rational reasoning or rational explanation for this being a destroyed bombings? You say you don't see these things, or you say in one way you don't give evidence for it. Chomsky will. So that was the 9th email. Again, basically whining about tone and civility, despite all evidence to the contrary. Again, Chomsky's being infinitely fucking patient with this dude. He is being so patient with this dude. He's not necessarily being nice, but he is constantly engaging and discussing things in a very strict and very straightforward manner. And god damn it if Sam Harris ain't just whining and dodging and complaining. But then at least he lays out a couple of points here. Clinton believed it was a weapons factory. He's saying that this is a fact, so there is fact and support for this. We would hope that he would put this forward, but he doesn't really explain why he believes and assumes. Again, he's just making an assumption based on what? What is your assumption based on? What is this based on? Second one is that not retaliation for embassy bombings. Why? All right. So Chomsky's going to respond because Chomsky always responds. We're on the 10th fucking email here. His back and forth has been an absolute nightmare. And at this point, Chomsky's definitely taking on attitude. I'm not going to lie. He's pissed. He's angry. Or not angry, but he's certainly irritated that a pop culture self-help guru style self-stylized philosopher who writes pop culture crap misquotes him, miscites him, and basically in print lies about Chomsky. And then when confronted by this, after he, the guy who's lying, reaches out to Chomsky saying, hey, let's have a debate. There might be some misunderstandings, but this is super fun and useful. Chomsky's like this, okay, look, dude. Look, it's obvious you're just trying to use my own fame as your own, as another stepping stone, and, we can have a great debate between Harris and Chomsky. It'll be this fantastic thing. You could write a book about or whatever. I see this, but look, before we start off, like, you lied about me a couple of times, and you misrepresented my work pretty severely. I'm willing to talk with you, but eventually it would be nice and civil for you, and ethically and academically responsible for you to admit you fucked up. He hasn't done this. for numerous emails. At this point, yeah, I'd be annoyed. This many emails that I've had to write and explain the same thing over and over again. At this point, Chomsky's probably explained his points probably, what, 3-4 times now? All in the same day in extensive detail. It's still April 27th, for God's sakes. They started April 27th. Or was it 26th? It's 26. Okay, this is going on 2 fucking days now, back and forth. Quite a few emails on the 27th, especially. So at this point, Chomsky's probably tired. He's got a lot of shit to do. Easy to know why you're unaware of me having writing about your work. I haven't done so. In contrast, you've written about my work with crucial false accusations that you evidently have no interest in correcting. As to my misconceptions about you, I'm interested to see that there is no credible source. Again, Chomsky has shown, I showed how you misrepresented and made false claims about me. Why can't/won't you show me the evidence of me doing the same to you as you have accused me of? Again, don't accuse Chomsky of doing something he hasn't fucking done. And if you're going to accuse him of something he's done, provide the source so that he can know 100%, okay, that's what you're referring to. And I can agree or disagree, or I can confirm or deny it. But otherwise, shut up about this. If you're not willing to provide a credible source, shut up about it. Turning to the more important question, however, because again, while this is important, it's ultimately not as important as the other things. Turning to the more important question of Shifa, why so? For the exact reasons I mentioned. The bombing of Al-Shifa was an immediate response to the embassy bombings, which is why it is almost universally assumed to be retaliation. It is inconceivable that in the brief and term period, evidence was found that it was a chemical weapons factory and properly evaluated to justify the bombing. So the first point is why was it retaliation? Why retaliation? Because everyone, academics and politicians, have noted that the timing of it is clearly indicative that it was in response to embassy bombings. Not only that, but it's also, why could we also see this was still retaliation? Second, so that's A. B. And second point is that it is unlikely that new information was discovered in interim period that showed weapons manufacturing. Again, if they had this prior, we would have seen it. Or people. Again, there are people, evidence and otherwise, evidence and statements back up this. There is no evidence, or more importantly, lack of evidence, and the fact that there are no statements, no really any kind of memos, anything talking about this, anything saying, hey, Al-Shifa might be using it as a chemical weapons. Nothing that was concrete, that was evidentiary or otherwise important enough to otherwise put forward that this was a valid target. And it's just coincidence that they decided to bomb this target then. They didn't bomb it a week before the embassy bombings. They didn't bomb it 6 months afterwards. They didn't bomb it. It is inconceivable that this just was coincidence. Plainly, and again, of course, no evidence has ever been found. Plainly, if there had been evidence, the bombing would not have, just by accident, taken place immediately after embassy bombings, along with the bombings in Afghanistan at the time, also clearly retaliation. So, again, there is no rational way to explain this except by assuming that he intentionally bombed what he was known to be Sudan's major pharmaceutical plant. And of course, he and advisors knew that under severe sanctions, this poor African country could not replenish them. So it was a much worse crime than if Al Qaeda had done it in the US or Israel or any other country where people mattered. So again, why? Why so? Again, this is naive to assume that one, he believed it was a chemical weapon factory. This is rather naive and incredibly convenient thinking to say, concerning the fact that there's no evidence that it was a medical chemical weapons factory found at the time, and it doesn't seem to be have found much afterwards. Not credible enough, and it had not been evaluated to justify bombing. So that makes this one immediately false. No rational reason. Again, the rationale is not good, but the rationale is there in that it seems obvious, based on timing and other people's statements, that it was probably, again, retaliatory against the embassies, or a retaliation for the embassy bombings. That is why it's terribly naive. So then, we get back to intentionality. Intention. Clinton bombed it in retaliation. Knew they could not replenish based on, again, sanctions that were in place by the U.S., so they knew the capabilities of what these countries could and could not produce because they're sanctioning them. They kind of know. And they had also received reports from the HRW. Received reports of effect from HRW that were confirmed almost certainly. So, again, his intention, it makes no sense to say that he did not intend to have these people die unless, again, either he is malevolently ignorant of his actions and doesn't care, or, again, that's just kind of the end of it. Or he did know it, but also at the same time is in this weird sociopathic, I don't intend on harm, but I want to get this done so much that it just somehow doesn't matter. I did not again claim that Clinton intentionally wanted to kill thousands of victims. Rather, that it was probably of no concern, raising the very serious ethical question that I have discussed again repeatedly in this correspondence. And again, I have often discussed the ethical question about the significance of real or professed intentions for about 50 years, in fact, discussing real cases where there are possible and meaningful answers. Something clearly worth doing since the real ethical issues are interesting and important ones. Again, notice there's plenty of material for Sam Harris to respond to every single time, but Sam Harris only responds to, for the most part, the majority of the response is responding to his indignity, to his personal feelings about how he's being insulted. Now, Noam does always bring up, again, Sam Harris's mischaracterization, but the vast majority of his material is dealing with the question. Whereas the vast majority of Sam Harris's thing, again, most of this is just kind of silly explaining. Like sometimes he deals with it, but most part, he just dodges the question. Always. So again, it is utterly useless. The 11th email. We're nearing the end, fellas. We're almost done. Gnome. I am hard-pressed to understand the uncharitable attitude, really bordering on contempt, conveyed by almost everything you have written thus far. Again, at this point, it is the contempt is, if there is contempt, it is necessary because, like, look, dude, you are just not engaging with this really seriously to any degree because you can't. So you just run around the bush. And honestly, this isn't even that contemptible. Again, there's some meanness here and there, but even then, the fact that Sam Harris cannot let it go because he is so thin-skinned. Again, he is such a snowflake. Such a snowflake and sensitive. Like, this guy has never been talked down to in his life, and he is just having an existential fucking crisis, it feels like. What is it adding to the discourse? You've thrown some shade already. What did it add there? And at this point, again, just answer and deal with the questions. If you wanted some disinterested feedback, we might pass this exchange along to Lawrence and Johan, as you suggested below. I believe they will echo my concern and tell you that you're not doing yourself any favors here. The hilariousness of this is that, again, he's trying to, like, appeal to, like, this, say some kind of like this, everyone would agree with me that Chomsky is being mean and unproductive. To spoil it a little bit, from my memory and from what I've investigated back when I kind of looked at this years ago, and I think some people have written about it here and there. The general sense of this is that everyone agrees that Harris was, at best, way out of his depth and understanding, refused to engage with the topics effectively and ethically, and in general came off as a bitch. That last part is my editorialization, but most people kind of look at it, especially the philosophy community and outside, like in academia, most people, if they ever heard about this or came across this, thought, well, this, like, yeah, Chomsky's a bit prickly, but goddamn, Sam Harris, you just really aren't fucking working. Like, this is just embarrassing. It's genuinely embarrassing. And Sam Harris still tries to defend himself or tries to present it as how somehow he isn't the reason why this conversation went fucking nowhere. That's why this conversation is going nowhere, is because Harris can't deal with this. God, he's frustrating. Let's get some extra lines here. All right. Your latest email is as strangely prickly as the others. Again, stop wasting time with tone. He almost Chomsky spends maybe a little bit talking about this, but even then, even when he's being prickly, he's still being pointed to a specific developing conversation. This is just whining about tone. Again, if you haven't written about my work, why not just say so rather than act like you sprung a trap on me? I never assumed you had written about me. In fact, I assumed you hadn't. So what was the point of this reciprocation business? All right. Where is... So I think there's only reciprocation. There's only that one. So this is one of the earlier emails. This is like the first response email. Reciprocate by referring to me what I've written, citing your published views. Again, you said here, way earlier, past all your bullshit here, that, let's see here. In fact, you have called me a religious fanatic, worshiper of state religion. Makes me think there are a few misconceptions. So yeah, it never says he writes about him. So certainly that. But again, part of this, yeah, there's a degree of prickliness. But one of the things is like, look, I never published anything about you that is otherwise misrepresentative to any degree that is as erroneous as this. Again, he's being a bit prickly, certainly. But again, you should acknowledge you were in error. You haven't acknowledged for fucking 10 goddamn emails. And again, reciprocate. Part of the reciprocation, part of the thing that he's also been asking to do is like, he's asked several times, Chomsky has asked, where have I said you're a religious fanatic? You keep saying that I misunderstood you, miscited to you. Where is this? Give me a source. What is this? And really, you're interested to see that there's no credible source for my claim that you have called me a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. Is your own mouth a credible source? Watch this video and behold you speaking the very words I attribute to. One, sass out the ass here. And two, he didn't understand reading comprehension, failing. Sam Harris is failing at basic reading comprehension. That when he said, interested to see that there's no credible source, this isn't necessarily some kind of like some gotcha kind of thing. He is just quite literally saying that, look, you keep saying I said something about you. I remember you said this. You made an accusation. So far, other than just your own words in this thing, I have seen no other credible source. So provide one. Again, you keep complaining about this, and you've brought it up more than once. Show me your credible source. Why, like, again, there's this right here, this your own mouth credible. Why didn't this video pop up? I don't know, 4 or 5 emails ago, saying like this, oh, by the way, for the credible sources for calling me a blah, 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 and blah, 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 a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. Here would be the one of the source which I'm drawing from, which is a YouTube video of an interview. Just put that up there. Like, the fact that it took you a dozen goddamn emails to do this is fucking nuts. And the fact that you somehow seem to be saying that Noam Chomsky was trying to say that there is no such credible source. I've never said this. He didn't say he did or didn't say this. He hasn't written about you, and he's not even sure about that claim. He's just like, provide a source. Just provide a fucking source, dude. Provide me a credible source that I say this, rather than like, oh, you met me one time. Like, I don't know if I did or not. Like, I do this a lot. I'm a major academic. Give me your source for when I said this. I have a question that I would like you to ponder for at least 5 seconds before responding to this email. Is it possible for you to enter into discussion on these topics with me in a spirit of genuine curiosity and goodwill? What the fuck do you think has been happening for literally 2 days? And damn near a dozen fucking emails now. Just this whining, this poisoning of this well. Again, 5 seconds before responding. Again, he did enter into the conversation with a spirit of genuine curiosity, whatever the fuck that means, and goodwill. He's entertaining your questions, but part of the thing is that you did make claims about him that are incorrect. Correct them. Then we move on. Stop being such an unprofessional, whiny child. Just bitch. Good Lord. Contrary to your repeated allegations, I have not refused to correct my false accusations about you. I'm still struggling to understand in what sense they are false. At this point, again, like, I think he's just deliberately not paying attention. He has made, again, you say he has not considered them. That's the accusation. He has considered them and he dismissed them the matter of intentionality, or at least he finds that they are not particularly pertinent to the moral or ethical level in which he is currently discussing. On a larger group national level, on the individual level, this is more internal psychology, personality analysis. It's not particularly useful or relevant, and it doesn't provide much useful information for what he's doing. Again, how the hell are you not realizing that your statements are false? You said he never thought about this. He did think about this. He thought about it, examined the ideas and the thoughts behind it, examined the rationales behind it, and then explained why these don't work. And then he said, ultimately, because they don't work and they aren't useful, I am dismissing them. They aren't particularly useful. This is a false accusation. Your dismissal of an idealized thought experiment as embarrassing and ludicrous, and your insistence on focusing on real-world cases about which our intelligence is murky is not helpful to clarify things. Our intelligence, the murkiness of this intelligence is literally points towards in favor of Chomsky's analysis. The parts where we are murky on is, for the most part, intentionality. Because we do have basic evidence to suggest, either circumstantial or direct evidence, that they knew, they understood the consequences, they still did it. Why won't you deal with my idealized thought experiment that was, again, ludicrous, embarrassing, to where even you previously stated that, look, obviously Sam Harris even said earlier, literally earlier, that, where was this? Extreme analogy was to showcase intentions matter. Again, that's why he did this extreme analogy, was just emphasize intentions over any other considerations. But again, Chomsky's notes is that the reason why I don't really deal with this, or it's a silly one, is because I have considered intentions, and at this point, I'm not going to deal with this. This is like, well, why won't you deal with the ideas of alchemy to a scientist? We did. We have dealt with the matters and discussed and debated these. They are not fucking relevant and not useful. Ergo, I'm not going to waste too much time talking about it. But what about the alchemy science of this? Again, these matters have been talked about. You made an incorrect thing saying that I did not deal with this. Move on. How dare you deal with real-world cases? With respect to Al-Shifa, for instance, you draw some very confident and I suspect unwarranted. Why would you suspect this? Have you done any study into this matter? Have you looked at any records? Chomsky has. Chomsky has written about it. You would know if you would fucking do your research and know that Chomsky has. And I'm not even sure I 100% agree, because I haven't done the research on this, but I certainly am not going to say that his conclusions are wrong or even suspect that they're unwarranted, because that's just not really how Chomsky works. Chomsky is really pretty dedicated to citations and working with the best available evidence. His interpretations may be strange or ways in which some people may not agree with, myself included on some cases, but I would never suggest that he's making confident assertions on basic inferences of time events and all this. Like, it's just not that hard. It's not going to be working out too well. And first, is it really inconceivable that the government had already believed it to be a chemical weapons factory? I don't know. Maybe Chomsky has looked into the data, or asked and interviewed, or looked at other interviews, and people have written about this, government officials at the time, who might be stating, as a matter of fact, in their opinion, that they never saw it as a chemical weapons factory. Have you bothered to look and see why he's made these things? Or are you just trying to poison the well? Ah, you're just trying to poison the well. Ah. Do I have to accept all your assumptions in order to discuss the underlying ethics? No, but you do have to do your basic due diligence. And again, this is where he's being called out, is that
Harris is a poor academic and does not like to do research or cite things, but rather talk and discuss with little consequence. And your ethical position is still unclear to me. You say that you are not claiming that Clinton intentionally wanted to kill thousands of victims. Okay, but you seem to suggest he had every reason to expect that he would be killing them by his actions and just didn't care. And you seem disinclined to distinguish the ethics of these cases. Well, he is distinguishing them. He's saying in many ways that this is actually kind of worse, because at least this one would acknowledge a desire to kill a human being as a human being, whereas this one is just a lack of care for the destruction of life because it is lesser. He actually has distinguished the cases here. Perhaps we can rank the order of callousness and cruelty here. Al-Qaeda wanted and intended to kill thousands of innocent people and did so. Clinton, as you imagine to be, did not want to kill or intended to kill thousands of innocent people. He simply wanted to destroy a valuable pharmaceutical plant, but he knew he would be killing thousands of people and simply didn't care. 3. Clinton, as I imagine him to be, did not want or intend to kill anyone necessarily. He simply wanted to destroy what he believed to be a chemical weapons factory, but he did wind up killing innocent people, and we really don't know how he felt about that. Is it safe to assume that these are the 3 cases, as I do, are demonstrative of descending degrees of evil? Again, all he thinks about is intentionality. He literally, and again, this is just kind of that hardcore, insane, liberal, individualistic, kind of, as long as I personally, individually did not intend to do a thing, you can't blame me for the consequences of it. So, Gnome. At this point, Gnome probably is very, very tired. My brain farting on that one. Jesus. 12th email. Let's review this curious non-interchange. It began with you suggesting a public debate because of the fact you have called me a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state. Makes me think there are a few misconceptions we can put. So it begins with you begin asking for a debate, but you published false statements about me. You publish versions of my views that are completely false, and the only source you have for the fact that you cite is something on YouTube, in which, as you wrote, that I may have been talking about Christopher Hitchens and you, given the way the question was posed, or maybe about Hitchens, whose views I know about, whereas in your case, I only know about your published falsifications of my views, which readers of yours have sent me, and which I didn't bother to respond to. Therefore, the only meaningful debate could be about your published falsifications. You want to debate about how we have, call a religious fanatic and worship of the religion of state. So again, in investigating this, Chomsky goes, look, I haven't found anything I've ever actually written about you. I have found that you, through people sending it to me, have falsely made false statements or egregious misunderstandings about my work. And the only thing that you can even point to that is of equivalence to this degree of working out and debating our differences of opinion, whether or not we understand each other wrong or right. The only thing you can point to is a YouTube video where I could have been talking about Christopher Hitchens and you, or just Hitchens, which views, again, Chomsky does know about Hitchens, and he doesn't know about Harris. So, all things being equal, it's more likely that he was talking about Hitchens more so than Harris, which means that he wasn't calling Harris a religious fanatic who worships the religion of the state, though that may be an accurate assessment of him, but rather he was talking more about Hitchens. Therefore, the only meaningful debate could be about your published falsifications. Again, that's ultimately the only real thing. You didn't say you wanted to debate about the Al-Shifa bombing and about the 9/11, about the intentionalities. You began and focused primarily about how we just want to be friends. You just want to be friends and clear the air about our understanding of each other. Again, you might put this as something like, well, this would be super useful for everyone else, but it's like this. Yeah, but this is that half-assed debate bro bullshit to where nobody really cares about what they're saying. It's just good entertainment for everyone to see pseudo-intellectual people bullshit about it. But Chomsky, whether you agree or disagree with him, is not a pseudo-intellectual. This is purple. This is just, why would I do this? There is no like point to this other than just having two guys talk intelligently to each other for a while. And golly gee, isn't that just fucking amazing? Again, maybe that might be entertaining for some people, and I can even be entertained by it, but Chomsky doesn't give a shit. He doesn't want to be a friend. The only thing he can see that is actually relevant is not this, but clear the air. Again, there doesn't seem to be any real factual basis for Chomsky misunderstanding, misquoting, and otherwise saying false things about you, because the only thing you provide is a crappy YouTube video to where it's hardly difficult to see whether or not he's talking about Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, or just Hitchens or Harris. That's weak. Therefore, the only thing that actually could have some substantial factual matter of the case is Harris's falsifications. These, as we have reviewed, are quite extreme. Your primary charge is that I neglected to ask very basic questions about intentions. As we have now established, I asked and responded to exactly those basic questions in this case and other cases, while you have completely failed to address the basic questions about the significance of professed intentions. Again, remember, there's a reason why I highlighted these things all the way back. From the way you read this, again, you might want to assume, based upon some kind of weird interpersonal drama bullshit, like this is absolutely a drama YouTube fucking thing, but that's not high level academia, and that's the only thing that Chomsky gives a shit about is high level academia, and the politics are the things that are affected by this. For him, the only two things that really are being important here is the two things that he makes statements about. Chomsky makes moral equivalency. Chomsky doesn't ask questions about these things. Everything else is pointless. Everything else is pointless. And as he says here, you say I don't address these things. However, I have. And you have not addressed the basic questions about the significance of professed intentions. About the actual intention, we can only guess. There are two important questions about these. One, how serious do we take them? Again, notice how much detail he's given here. How serious do we take the nature and the truth speaking of professed intentions? Again, how serious do we take the professed intentions of people? How so? That's the question. So everyone has these things. So let's go through the list. How serious do we take them? How do we rank, again, as he does right here, intentional, well, let's give a space on that, intentional killing as intentional killing, or again, knowledge of killing. So again, one, to answer these things, how seriously do we take the professed intentions of these things? Discussed in 50 years, explaining in detail why, as we all agree, such professed intentions carry little, if any, weight, and in fact are quite uninformative, since they are almost entirely predictable, even in the case of the worst monsters, and I have also provided evidence that they may be quite sincere, even in the case of these monsters, but you of course dismiss them nonetheless. In contrast, you seem to have never discussed one. How seriously would you take the professed intentions? Not important or informative. They are pointless. As for 2, I posed the question, the one serious moral question that arises in the case at issue. And though I didn't give a definitive answer, I suggested what I think, that one might argue on moral grounds B is even worse than A, is more depraved than A. Again, it seems you have never even considered true, let alone discussed it. Not particularly. To summarize then, you issue instructions about moral issues that you have never even considered to people who have considered and discussed these issues for many decades, including the very case you cite. And when this is explained to you in detail, you have nothing to say except to repeat your initial stance. As if that's enough, you evaded the question asked in the passage you cite. And when I asked you for a response, you did give an answer, or so I assumed. To be crystal clear, and God, he's being so patient here. Notice how much more he's writing to really hammer home and give you tons of material to work with. And look how little Sam Harris is going to engage with this. To be crystal clear, either that response was irrelevant to the question, or you intended it to be taken seriously. That is, to be relevant to the Clintons' bombing of Al-Shifa. I assume the latter. Again, when he came up with his stupid, irrelevant hypothetical. In that case, it follows at once, as I wrote, that the claim is ludicrous and embarrassing if you're trying to use this hypothetical to compare it to the actual event. If you're just using it to talk about intentionality, again, we kind of talked about intentionality, but it's ultimately kind of a dead end. I don't know why you keep talking about this. It's kind of a silly thing to talk about. You now say that it was only a thought experiment. That leaves us where we are. Either it is irrelevant, or it is ludicrous and embarrassing, or else you are refusing to answer the question. All of this is straightforward enough that I need to not to spell it out any further. Yeah, either it was irrelevant, and you just were wasting time. It was ludicrous and embarrassing if you meant it to be intentional, or it was a dodge, and you had absolutely no, it was a meaningless statement either way. So we're left at nothing. Let's finally turn to your interpretation of Al-Shifa. Clinton did not want or intend to kill anyone necessarily. He simply wanted to destroy what he believed to be a chemical weapons factory, but he did wind up killing innocent people, and we don't really know how he felt about it. I am sure you're right that Clinton did not want or intend to kill anyone. That is exactly my point. Rather, assuming that he is minimally sane, he certainly knew he would kill a great many people, but he simply didn't care. Case 2 above. This is the only thing of relevance that we can actually analyze here. Unless he was insane and didn't have any idea that this was happen, again, the only thing we can really do as far as intentionality, if we want to look at that, is what's worse, intentionally killing a human being or killing a human being knowing it's going to do this, but not really intending it or caring about it. This is why intention ultimately doesn't matter that much. The one serious moral issue, which I've discussed contrary to your charge, and you never have. You really haven't dealt with this. You keep trying to say, well, no, he didn't intend on doing this, so therefore it's not bad, but you're not really like this. Well, again, you're not really developing the conversation particularly well, Sam. As for the rest, you may, if you like, believe that when Clinton bombed Afghanistan and Sudan, an immediate reaction to the embassy bombings, And in retaliation, as it is naturally assumed, he had credible information he was bombing a chemical factory, which also was, as publicly known, the major pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, which of course could not replenish supplies. And he judged that the evidence was strong enough to overlook the human consequences. But oddly, he was never able to produce a particular particle of credible evidence as was widely reported. So again, even if he had the good intentions to prevent massive harm, like the crazy, ludicrous example that Sam Harris comes up, evidence so far does not seem to be forthcoming that this was the case. When informed immediately by HRW that a humanitarian catastrophe was already beginning, he ignored it, as he ignored the subsequent evidence about the scale of the casualties, as you instantly did too. On your assumptions, he's quite clearly a moral monster, and there's no need to comment further on people who seek to justify these crimes. Your crimes and mine as citizens of a free society where we can influence policy. It seems to me clear that your response should be on elementary moral grounds. I'm not holding my breath. "13th email. I'm sorry to say that I've now lost hope, Gnome, that we can communicate effectively in this medium. Gnome's communicating incredibly effectively. You're just not fucking engaging anymore because your ego is bruised beyond salvation. Rather than explore these issues with genuine interest and civility, he's been incredibly civil. He's being sharp, but I'm sorry. This is emails. This is fucking 12 plus emails where, for the most part, Chomsky, by like the second email, the third email certainly, has fairly effectively discussed these things or brought them up, and you just keep circling around, unable to deal with anything he's talking about. Rather than explore these issues with genuine interest and civility, you seem committed to litigating all points. How dare he litigate all the points in the most plotting and accusatory way? And so, to my amazement, I find the only conversation you and I are likely ever to have has grown too tedious to continue. Yep, that's what happens when you're actually held to account, and it's not just some bullshit fest where a couple of half-assed intellectuals jerk each other off in front of an audience. It's what happens when things have consequences and people actually work. Please understand that this is not a case of you having raised important challenges for which I have no answer. Of course you didn't beat me. You didn't beat me. I'm not running away. You didn't beat me. To the contrary, I would find it a thrilling result of any collision between us. And, as I said at the onset, I would be eager for readers to witness it. Rather, you have simply convinced me that engaging with you on these topics is a waste of time. Apologies for any part I played in making this encounter less enlightening than it might have been. Well, see, there's like, why send this email with nothing more? Like, if you just want to end the email, just say you're terminating it. Just end the email with this with ellipses and just this half-assed emotional thing. No, I'm at this point. Good. Suck. Very glad to see we are terminating this interesting non-interchange with a large measure of agreement. I agree with you completely that we cannot have a rational discussion of these matters, and that it is too tedious to pretend otherwise. And I agree that I am litigating all points, all real as far as we are so far determined, in a plotting and accusatory way. That is, of course, a necessity in responding to quite serious things. You are not a serious academic if you are complaining about all points and plotting details. Responding to quite serious published accusations that are demonstrably false. And as I have reviewed, false in a way most interesting ways. Namely, you issue lectures condemning others for ignoring basic questions that they have discussed for years, in my case decades, whereas you have refused to address them and apparently do not even allow yourself to understand them. That's impressive. Ooh. Ooh. There's also no other way to pursue our various your various evasions of the basic question that arises right at the outset of the passage of mine you quoted. No need to run through this again, but the plotting review makes it clear that you simply refuse to answer the question. Perhaps not surprisingly. I'll put aside your apologetics for the crimes for which you and I share responsibility, which frankly I find quite shocking, particularly on the part of someone who feels entitled to deliver moral lectures. And I'll also put aside your interesting feeling that you see no challenge when your accusations are refuted point by point, along with the demonstration that you are the one who refuses to address the basic questions that you charge me with ignoring, even after you've learned that I've dealt with them quite specifically before you wrote, in fact, for decades. It would be interesting if someday you decide to actually become concerned with God-intoxicated sociopaths, most notably the perpetrator of the worst crime of the millennium, who did so, he explained, because God had instructed him that he must smite the enemy. I believe he's referring to Bush here. Again, #15th email. No, I'm afraid I won't take the bait. Apart from asking the obvious question, if you're so sure you acquitted yourself well in this conversation, exposing both my intellectual misconduct with respect to your work and my moral blindness regarding the actions of our government, why not let me publish it in full so that our readers can draw it? Can I publish to still get some content, Daddy? And then the rest of this is just confirmation and stuff like this. So, the idea of publishing personal correspondence is pretty weird and a strange form of exhibitionism, whatever the content. Personally, I can't imagine doing it. However, if you want to do it, I won't object. Understood. I'll let you know what I do. So, Noam, I've read your correspondence through and have decided to publish it, and I understand your point about exhibitionism, but I disagree. You and I probably share a million viewers. No, he's still like this. We share so many friends or whatever. It was so tired and sad. He has this postscript here. And honestly, it's just more of the same insanity. And again, it's he's trying to pick this up because he posted May 1st and he genuinely thought he had something going here. May 3rd, he does do a couple things. Again, he didn't publish it because I thought I won. I just published it because I'm trying to be fair. No, he genuinely thought he was showing Chomsky to be stupid and mean and not understanding his intellect. 2, it is now clear to me that I did very narrowly, notice he still won't even admit it, misrepresented Chomsky and the end of faith. Obviously, he had asked himself very basic questions about what the U.S. government intended when it bombed Al-Shifa Pharmaceutical. Rereading the text along with the relevant sections of the book 9/11, I can see my point was not that he literally hadn't asked these questions, but that the answers he arrived at are, in my opinion, scandalously wrong. That's not what you fucking said. You said you've never considered it at all, and you're just, there's just scandalously wrong. Again, you're doing this postscript to try to salvage this conversation, which sucked. He didn't ignore the role of human intentions, but he effectively ignored it because he did not appear to give intentions any ethical weight. Yes, and he explains why. You dumbass. You may disagree with him to some degree, I suppose, but good God. This debate has been going on forever, and he's explained explicitly why the stated intentions of governmental officials who have done war crimes or terrible crimes don't really matter in an ethical consideration of the crimes themselves and justifications or anything like that, because it's not really that useful. Again, Chomsky, a moral equivalence, he still doesn't understand that he wasn't making a moral equivocal argument. Because I aim to have a productive dialogue, I ignored most of Chomsky's initial accusations in the hopes, again, the accusations needed to be addressed. He was accusing you of the thing that you literally just said you did do, and you have not clarified, and you didn't bother to clarify. It's perfectly acceptable for an academic to want you to fucking, if you want a productive dialogue with me, you got to admit a couple of things you got dreadfully wrong about me. And it is evasive, and especially because, again, you're evading the evasion was mostly about the actual questions, because you can't view anything outside of just the individual intentionality. I agree with readers who feel that I might have done more to get the conversation on track. Boy, you didn't do anything. That's not what they're saying. They're saying you sucked ass, dude. Certain readers saw my focus on Chomsky's cone as an abject attempt to dodge hard questions. I can only reiterate that it wasn't. It was. You spent the vast majority of your emails. If we were to count word count, the vast majority of his emails, outside of the first one, the majority of them individually, and I think even across the entire board, excluding the first one where he has tons of quotation from his book, the majority of it is him talking about the tone and him desperately trying to get Chomsky to not take him to task. Again, it's fun going back through this. I love reviewing these kind of things because they really are illuminations on, at least for a lot of people, I think they can help illuminate the leftist anger, frustration, and general dislike for liberals, especially kind of like these kind of very state approved, or the lovers of the U.S. state, the defenders of especially U.S. foreign policy, why they might be so frustrated and angry with these types is how impossibly dense they are when it comes to the moral and ethical landscape outside of their incredibly narrow view. They're incredibly biased and narrow view. But we're going to go ahead and end it there. We started the stream late, and we're going to have to end it here early. My apologies, but hey, this hopefully was educational and or at least entertainment. We have our little educational programs, and I think we're going to try to do this every Thursday. We're going to have our little educational thing. So we may do lots of gaming and review and slop content to some degree, but I'm going to try to do more educational stuff on Thursdays. So feel free to join the classroom then. But otherwise, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, and as always, I hope you have a good one.